Well, it's that time again, Than.
It's about that time.
About that time. Time to respond to another atheist video saying God is evil again and again and again and again. And here we are yet again doing it. So how are you doing today there, Than?
I'm good. I just ready to dig into this, I guess.
Yep. So backstory, everyone wants to know. I had a TikTok dispute with a girl back in November, December, and I ended up making shorts out of it. So then the YouTube creator, Mindshift, atheist creator, decided to respond to a 1 minute short, do a whole half-hour video on this 1 minute short of mine. And so basically what I was pointing out in the video is the girl said that, like, why are these stories in the Bible like Lot and his daughters? Or, you know, Abraham giving his wife to Pharaoh. And I'm like, well, these are descriptions. God didn't prescribe that behavior. Okay. So you can't say, you know, a lot of times God is just recounting the history of Israel to show things like, you know, look, this is why you need a savior, lead up to Christ, these kinds of things. So Mindshift responded and said, well, I'll make a video where God is directly okay with evil. And he supposedly gives numerous examples of God condoning evil we see of the patriarchs or prophets. And he says in his opening of his video that he's going to agree. He's not just going to go to descriptions. He's going to go to actual prescriptions. And then he doesn't. And then he just goes to more descriptions. And it's like, dude, I thought you said you were going to actually offer some criticism here. And you just do exactly what you said you weren't going to do, which is just show us more descriptions of evil in the Bible and assume God endorsed it.
Yeah, that's the first thing I noticed as I was listening to the video. It seems like he starts the video by saying, we're going to go through a lot of places where God actually prescribes evil. And then the overwhelming majority of these are just descriptions. And he adds in, well, God didn't actually say this was bad, so therefore this must be a prescription. It seems at least like that's what's going on.
Yeah, he plays a lot with ambiguity. Now, there are some legitimate concerns. That's why we're addressing this. It's not like he doesn't make any, like, it's not like his arguments are all bad. Some of them miss the mark. But, I mean, a lot of what he brings up, he just sort of plays with ambiguities. And so before we even get into it, there's a lot of presuppositions that need to be established. Like, for example, and sometimes in the video, he's mad that God doesn't punish Abraham or Jacob. But then he's mad that God punishes the Canaanites for their sin later. Like, we see this kind of like attitude where it's like, if God punishes someone, well, that's bad. If God doesn't punish someone, well, that's also bad. It's a lose-lose. There's a lot of appeals to emotion in this video, which is not a valid argument. At one point, he even says, I'm going to pull on the strings of your heart here. Like, dude, like that's an argument from an emotion at that point. So it's not a valid argument at that point. We need to look at this logically. Another issue is he's playing a lot with ambiguity. Like, a lot of times he's like, well, God doesn't directly like punish Jacob or Abraham, therefore he's probably okay with it. And if that's the argument that Mindshift is making a lot, we don't have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he is wrong. We just have to offer philosophical defeaters.
Yep.
And what that would simply be is show there's a logical reason as to why, or there's a more charitable way to understand that, which is what we'll do a lot of times. And given the principle of charity, our interpretation should be preferred, because we employ the principle of charity when it comes to things like this. For example, if Than and his wife are supposed to come over to my house for dinner and only Than shows up and he says, well, my wife can't come, she's tied up right now. And I would be like, what? You tied her up? You monster. How dare you? That would not be a charitable interpretation of Than's words. We should take the principle of charity and understand Than was probably being metaphorical there. So a lot of times, a lot of Mindshift's arguments can be responded to just by employing the principle of charity. Than, anything you want to say on this before I continue with a couple more points?
Just on the principle of charity thing, no, I think he summed that up pretty well. The only thing I would just kind of add on to that is that throughout the video, it seems like he was just kind of nitpicking some anticipated responses that not every Christian is going to give. He kind of anticipated objections from Christians that people typically won't give unless they're like on the way hyper literalist camp or something like that. There's types of responses that the church has been giving for a really long time, like progressive revelation and like redemptive movement ethic hermeneutics and stuff like that. And I was telling you this off screen, but another thing I just think is like some philosophical issues where it seems like he just presumes the Bible like teaches a really strict deontological ethic rather than like a type of virtue ethic. And he used
Right.
like fabricate contradictions. So those are some of my preliminaries.
Yeah, and the other thing is we have to understand. I did a whole video on this on cultural context of the biblical world series. It's called High and Low Context Societies. And in that video, I pointed out that we're a low context society and that we put as much context in the text as possible. The biblical authors lived in a high context society. So oftentimes they left context out. And, these are not terms I made up. These are terms you get from actual scholars. So a lot of times context is just sort of implied. Like Abraham did something wrong here. Noah did something wrong here when he got drunk and that kind of stuff. It doesn't need to be directly said like it is in low context societies. So you can't assume the biblical authors are condoning behavior or saying God endorsed the behavior because you're judging from a low context society. So that's another problem. The other issues we got to get to. I have no idea if Mindshift is doing an internal critique or he's making the objective claim that the biblical God is evil.
Yeah.
He seems to go back and forth. In some instances, he says he's just an internal critique from the biblical worldview. God is violating his own rules and is acting evil. Sometimes he seems to be saying objectively God is evil. If that's the case, we can just employ the atheist-hated Frank Turek method. By what standard are you saying that God is evil in this?
Yeah.
Because again, if you're going to say this is objectively evil, I will protest. If this is an internal critique, the problem with his internal critique is he's not taking the whole biblical worldview when he's judging these passages. For example, if you're going to say that God is, you have to recognize if you're going to say God is evil, you have to understand the moral values and duties, the moral duties and obligations for God are going to be different from us because of his ontology and his plane of existence. For example, God is on a higher plane of existence. It's wrong for humans to kill each other in this plane of existence because this is the plane of existence we're bound to. It would not be the same for God. Like a good analogy is to compare it to the world of Inception. Like if you and I were in a dream world, it might be the moral thing for me to kill you because it gets you out of the dream world and into this world again. Now, that's just an analogy. I'm not saying that's exactly the way it is with God, but you get the idea that if you're on a different plane of existence, or if you're aware of different planes of existence, your moral duties and obligations change. Another thing to keep in mind is knowledge of the future. That will change your duties and obligations. God has different moral obligations and duties because of his knowledge of the future. For example, let's say I knew the future and I'm on the side of the road and I conceal carry, so I have a gun, and I see a van pull up, grab a little girl from a family, and they throw her in the van and they chase off, and I don't do anything. You might say that I would have been morally obligated to pull my gun out and try to save the girl. However, if I did have knowledge of the future, and let's say I did in this instance, and I knew the van was going to go down the road, slam into a drunk driver in about 100 yards, prevent that drunk driver from going down the road like 15 minutes later and killing another family. And also when the van slams into the drunk driver, no one gets injured. And a cop just happened to be there and he arrests everyone and it's all taken care of. If I did have that knowledge of the future, you could argue my moral obligation would be to let it happen because I saved some future family from a drunk driver. The girl was, of course, rescued. And that is the better outcome than if I just had tried to save her in that instance. So because of that, now, again, not a direct analogy because you can say, well, God could have just like snapped the van out of existence or something like that. I get it. My point is that knowledge of the future changes your moral duties and obligations. Likewise with God, because he has knowledge of the future, he can have certain duties that would not be the same for us. A lot of the times in this video, Mindshift just assumes God has the same moral duties and obligations as us. And that just doesn't follow. And this also brings me to my next point, which is that if this is an internal critique, one of the arguments Mindshift constantly makes is it's wrong for God to end a life here, here, or there. That's never been the Christian position. We have always maintained God has a right to end life whenever he wants. He can create life whenever he wants. That is his prerogative. He can also end any life of any sinner whenever he wants because we've misused life improperly. The only reason most of us are still here is because of mercy. So we have never argued that it's somehow wrong for God to end a life whenever he wants. We've argued that's morally justifiable, especially with a sinner involved who has misused the life God has given him. So Mindshift sometimes tends to assume that it's just wrong for God to end a life and he doesn't justify that argument.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that before I move on?
No, I think you summarized that really well.
Yeah. Other things, he seems to lack an understanding of God working through sin. God sometimes allows sin, as I mentioned, with his knowledge of the future to bring about better outcomes. I'll get to some examples later, like with the kingdom of David. God directly says in 1 Samuel 8, he didn't want this, but he worked through it anyway. He sort of assumes, as you mentioned, like a total understanding of deontological ethics. Both you and I are virtue ethicists. We argue the Bible teaches virtue ethics. With that in mind, God doesn't need to condemn every single action, every single bad action, and list every good action. That's not what virtue ethics is about. That's not what ancient ethics taught.
Yeah.
This is the whole point of virtue ethics. It's trying to recapture what ancient ethics was. In a virtue ethical system, you list the virtues and the vices, and then the reader is supposed to learn from that what are proper and good actions to take. And finally, things like he just lacks the principle of charity. A lot of his arguments can be addressed just by applying the principle of charity and offering sound defeaters to what he offers. So, with all of that said, there's a lot of stuff that I brought that up because remember a lot of the stuff I said here as we go through the video, because a lot of these presuppositions that were not sort of established or addressed in the opening of his video come back and are used in our response. Because again, there's a lot of, if this is an internal critique, there's a lot of aspects of the Christian worldview he's leaving out there, which it makes his arguments insufficient in multiple ways.
Cool. Yeah, I would. The only thing I would just remind the audience of too is, again, we have these doctrines of progressive revelation and these philosophical ideas of redemptive movement hermeneutics too. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a huge part of that as well.
Yeah. Real quick, Mindshift said he's here. He says if we want, he can hop on and answer questions. I will say not right now. You made the video. We're going to respond to the video. We're not going to detract from that. I would like to respond to what you said, and then we can have a conversation after if you want. So this video is about a response to something you put out, and I'd like to focus on that. Real quick, I'll get to some super chats here. Thank you, IP. Thank you for the super chat. JS asked regarding the idea the gates of hell are locked from the inside. How do you make sense of the parable of the rich man and Lazarus? Seems like the rich man is repentant and doesn't want to be there. Yeah, I would argue. See my video, does God send people to hell? I'd argue he doesn't, because he doesn't actually ask to get out of hell. And of course, it's a parable. So Jesus is implying certain things in there for theological reasons. I don't think it's a literal story. Let's get that out of the way. But I don't think he actually is repentant. He's just trying to get Lazarus into hell to serve him still, which means he still assumes his rich man status, not the humble status of wanting to get out and be kind of the servant type person we're supposed to be in heaven. So with that in mind, all right, Than, with that, are you ready to get into the video here?
Let's do it. I'm surprised we didn't get any sus IP super chats yet.
Oh, they'll show up. They'll show up. They never fail. Okay. So again, this is a response to, this is the girl I was debating with. I increased the speed slightly just so we get through it faster, but let's dive right in here.
We see these godly men in the Bible, like Moses and Lot, using women as objects.
They most certainly do. But don't confuse descriptions in the Bible with prescriptions.
Okay, I won't. Let's just talk about the times where God prescribed these morally repugnant behaviors. We won't talk about all the times where these actions are simply described. I'm with you, IP. First, let's talk about...
No, you're not. Yes, as we get into later, you definitely go back on that, sir. I apologize, but I mean, like, quite frankly, you'll see.
About Abraham. In fact, what I'm going to do today, and by the way, I'm Brandon, this is Mindshift, this is a Tuesday Takedown, not of IP, but just of the arguments themselves. And this is an argument that is all too common. Someone like myself points out something that happened in the Old Testament or even the New Testament that is morally and obviously wrong. And then an apologist or a Christian says these were broken, fallen men. God worked through them. Look at all the times God punished them for that wrong behavior. But I want to look at today the times that God did not punish them, which could be its own category. God staying out of it while essentially still allowing it. But we'll go further. Let's go straight to the times that God prescribes morally bad behavior. We're going to look at 10 patriarchs or leading men in the Old Testament for this exercise. We'll save the New Testament for another time, but I want to kind of major in the majors that they're talking about in this video.
Just because the Bible narrates the sin of the patriarchs and prophets, that doesn't mean it endorses their behavior.
So getting back to Abraham, God specifically tells Abraham to agree with his wife Sarah and exile Hagar and her son Ishmael from Abraham's household and protection. And I want to give you the full context of the story so that we can really draw out some of these examples. So first, Abraham and Sarah cannot conceive, and Sarah, who owns a foreign slave, not indentured servitude, this is an Egyptian slave, Hagar, as property, which by the way, In all the things that God condemns, he never condemns this. This is something he specifically endorses in Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. Sarah can do whatever she wants with this piece of property, and so she has Abraham have sex with her. She uses Hagar as a surrogate. We, of course, don't hear about Hagar's consent because why would we? And we do know that during the pregnancy, Hagar is mistreated by Sarah to the point that she wants to flee, and she does. She leaves into the wilderness, where she is tracked down by an angel from God, by the way, talking about prescriptions here, and tells her to go back and submit to Sarah, despite her mistreatment, because unlike those indentured servants, there are no laws to protect the foreigners. So she goes back and has her child, Ishmael, but then Sarah has Isaac. And one day, Sarah sees Isaac and Ishmael playing together, and she does not like this. So she tells Abraham, have Hagar and Ishmael removed, exile them. And even Abraham's not sure about this. He's like, but that's my son. Again, who cares about Hagar? She's just a woman, a piece of property. And God himself, let me read it to you.
Okay, but before we get there, let's address a couple things here.
Yeah.
Okay. If Hagar is just a piece of property, why does God appear to her the first time, take care of her, and then appear to her the second time to provide her water, assure her son will be blessed? Because in this ancient world, that is how you would basically assure your future. Your children were your retirement plan. God so cares for Hagar, he shows up not once, but twice, okay? I think that's more than he even shows up for Sarah, because he only shows up, I think, once with Abraham at the tent for her. Could be wrong on that, but shows up, make sure she's taken care of, make sure she has a future through her son, provides for her these kinds of things. I don't think we're getting the full context here. It's not that God doesn't care for her. That's nowhere at all implied in the text. In fact, the implication is in the opposite direction.
Yeah, the other thing I just want us to add in again here, this is going to be a common theme. He said, talk about prescription, but I think what we're looking at here is like moral prescriptions. And I don't see anywhere where God is like approving and saying this is a good thing or anything like that. It just seems like this is a description of God working with people where they're at.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is an analogy I've used before. So when Britain took over India, they outlawed marriage under the age of 12. Now, if you look at some of the work on that, some of the British wanted it higher. They wanted like marriage outlawed like under 16. But what happened when they outlawed marriage 12 and under? The Muslims and the Hindus in that country rioted in like the 1890s. They were so mortified that they could not marry children anymore. How dare the British do this? And so the argument is that, well, they're creating moral progress. They're starting at 12. And as we see, they've since then, Western ideas have seeped more into the country and it's raised, even though there is still child marriage practice there, but it's not, like endorsed at all by the government, this kind of thing. So we get the idea that they're creating moral progress, this kind of thing. Same happens in Saudi Arabia. They're trying to introduce more Western values to create more female equality. Let's just start by letting women have the ability to drive or go outside without a male escort. It's when we go to the Middle East and we try to just radically change things like we did in Iraq, it backfires because they tend to just collapse back into dictatorships or corrupt governments because they're just not societies built around or ready for democracy. It's much more likely to get actual long-lasting changes when you do these type of incremental changes, like slow boiling the frog kind of thing. What do we would expect God to do? The same kind of thing. He's not happy with the sin of humanity, but he's merciful and he's working through Abraham, Sarah, Hagar to bring about a better world slowly but surely. That does not mean he's endorsing everything going on in this. And as regards to the idea of God endorsing slavery, again, see my videos, the misunderstood Mosaic Law, the imperfect Mosaic Law, and the revolutionary Mosaic Law, 3-part series where I address that in more detail. We don't have time to get into it now. Anything else you want to add before I go on?
No, the last thing I'll just add on, and this is going to be a general thing that applies to all of these, again, is just if you want to get a glimpse of what God desires and what God likes and thinks is good and what's bad, another thing to look at is just look at the Edenic vision or like the eschatological vision of what reality is supposed to look like once all things are reconciled.
Yeah.
And
or even to add to that, Eden. In Eden, I mean, this is something Robert Alter notes, is that, Eve is not just like a helper. I noted this on my stream last week with Sygart, is that she has got like some sort of very strong active role. And only after the fall do we see that women are sort of put more in a subject role. Then we see in Christ's kingdom, male and female are equal. In fact, to the point where Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, the wife owns the husband's body, like this sharing of equality type thing. So that's a better way to look. When you're looking at states in the Old Testament, it's already admitted to be an imperfect world with imperfect situations going on.
Exactly.
All right, let's continue on here.
In Genesis 21:10-13. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah is telling you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. There's so many things happening here. First of all, you have God 100% endorsing exile them, split up this family. These brothers cause division, which we don't have time in today's video to talk about the implications of that and how we're still feeling those ramifications. Which
Okay,
God,
I'm going to stop there. Okay, for one thing, did he just blame the entire Arab-Jewish dispute on God splitting up Isaac and Ishmael? Like, really? That's all. This is all God's fault. He is now responsible for literally all of these disputes that have been going on since then. I'm not even entirely convinced all the Arabs are like necessarily descended from Ishmael. I think there's a lot of conjecture put into that. Odd argument right then and there. But also, what is the problem here? We see in like the very next patriarch, the sons of Isaac are literally fighting with each other and trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
Like, maybe God actually, given his knowledge of the future here, knows what he's doing. I got to split these boys up because they're going to kill each other. Then he looks at Esau and Jacob and goes, well, I think I can still work with that. But if Isaac and Ishmael stay together, it could be really bad on that timeline. Let me split them up. Let me give Isaac this land. I'll give Ishmael this land, and I will take care of them. And more of all, even though Hagar is a slave woman, God is still saying he is going to turn her son, the son of a slave, into a great nation. So God obviously cares about them. He doesn't look down upon Ishmael just because of his status or his bloodline. He can still turn them into a great nation. So this actually, in some ways, seems to be against the idea of like a caste system that we often see in the ancient world of like, if you're a slave, your children will be slaves. If you're a high class man, your children will be high class, you know, because that's very common in the ancient world. In God's world, no, I'm going to take the lowest of the low and make them great. Like, this doesn't seem to be bad. I mean, this, again, the interpretation of this just seems to be taking the least charitable interpretation possible.
Yeah. And that you see that theme all over the Old Testament too. I mean, we'll talk about firstborns and what all that is later on, but like even there, it's the theme of the firstborn. Oh, Stephen's here.
Stephen!
It's all about the role reversal thing in the ancient world, right? The whole, you take the people that you least expect and God does great things through them kind of a thing. It's like, that sounds like a pretty good guy to me.
Yeah. And, you know, Tom Holland, for example, notes that like the Bible has inspired so many anti-slave movements and abolitionist movements because of stories like this, or the story of the Exodus. The slaves get their own property, their own land. They get elevated up. Ishmael gets elevated up. I mean, you know, this is stuff Tom Holland has talked about a lot. So, I mean, again, we got to try to be charitable here. And I just don't see it. Yeah.
God with his foreknowledge would have known. But notice he refers to Hagar twice.
Whoa, wait, hold on. We just mentioned, let me back that up a little bit here.
Which we don't have time in today's video to talk about the implications of that and how we're still feeling those ramifications, which God with his foreknowledge would have known. But notice
with God with his foreknowledge would have known. So again, simple defeater to that is simply, since God does have foreknowledge, he could very well know that he has created a far better timeline that works with human free will, that still works with humans in sinful states, knowing that this is the best of all possible timelines he could have brought about. Like, you just can't say that like God chose the worst timeline. Like, you just granted God his foreknowledge.
Right.
Okay.
That just seems like a really weak problem of evil attempt there. And I'm just kind of like, we could go there. But it's not going to turn out that good.
Right.
he refers to Hagar twice in this verse as the slave woman and then the slave. He uses Sarah's name, but he does not use Hagar's name, as if the status of women wasn't already low enough. If you're a slave woman, we're not even going to name you. And the only reason that anything is being done to consider if we should take care of them or not is because, well, Ishmael is also still a son of Abraham, and that son carries weight, even if he's not the correct son, Isaac. And they're exiled. They're wandering through the desert, and they almost die of dehydration, and an angel comes to protect them because, again, Ishmael is still needed and has importance importance as a son of Abraham. But this exiling is a huge deal that God prescribed, not that the Bible describes. And again, in this story, in looking at it at a greater length, we understand God's allowance of the situation, the slave woman, the rape, let's call it what it is, of her, using her body to do something that Sarah can't. And then the immediate disposal of her when she no longer serves the purpose except to keep Ishmael alive, but not as important as Isaac. So much for caring about family values, so much for not endorsing polygamy, so much for not endorsing rape, so much for, well, if a slave runs away, let him go. No, God sends an angel to retrieve them. And IP should understand this, that there is context that would allow us to understand what this God condemns and what he condones. And all of these horrific things that I have just listed off are either 100% obviously prescribed by this God, or they are allowed or condoned or working within the order that he already gave. Oh, quick side.
Okay, so quick before we get to the quick call out here. Okay, yeah, context is important. Oh, let's actually talk about the context.
Yeah.
The context again is there is strife happening between Isaac and Ishmael, Sarah and Hagar. God in his foreknowledge, which Mindshift is granted, may know that the best thing to do in this situation is to split them up and to take care of Hagar and Ishmael as he does. Okay. He comes to them when they're dying of dehydration in the desert and saves them. He obviously cares. Also, if Hagar doesn't matter, why is she saved? Ishmael could go out at this point. He may not, we don't know his exact age, but he obviously has some weight at some point. He could just be sent out, maybe with some servants of Abraham, because Abraham had many. Why does he save Hagar? Like, again, we're not taking the whole context into consideration here, and yet we're being told we have to take the context into consideration.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I'm going to sound like a broken record, but at the end of that, he goes, again, you have like a moral prescription, but then he throws in the or with a bunch of other things where God just either doesn't stop it from happening or whatever. But I thought this was all about times where God is prescribing immoral things. So what's going on here?
And it goes back to the point I made in the beginning. God's foreknowledge, knowledge of the future, will make his moral duties and obligations different. A good movie that you guys should watch is The Butterfly Effect from like 20 years ago with Ashton Kutcher. It's really good demonstration of this. Like he's got the ability to travel back into the past and change things. And he keeps trying to get himself set up with this one girl, but he keeps making her miserable. So finally he goes back and just makes sure that they're never together. And that's the only way that they're both happy and live good lives. Okay. If you have that kind of foreknowledge about people's sin and what they're going to do with their free will choices, your duties and obligations could be very different in these kinds of situations. Than, you asked, and it showed up. Fat IP is here. There he is.
That's not sus IP. That's
listen. This is all we got. Sus IP is a little busy, so Fat IP is filling in today. Yeah. Fat IP, beardless IP, sus IP, Muslim IP. They're all out there somewhere in the ether. You never know.
Oh man.
All right, let me continue on here.
Quick side note, I did have the verse pulled up about Abraham lying in Egypt about Sarah being his wife. And was Abraham punished for lying, which is supposedly wrong? No. When they took Sarah into the court of Egypt, God sent plagues upon them. Why? They were just following the information that they had that was from the lie of Abraham. So not only did God not show his disapproval of the lie, even if he doesn't specifically prescribe it, but he curses not Abraham, but the Egyptians for being on the other side of the lie, which they had nothing to do with, and then blesses Abraham moving forward. These are the kinds of things I'm talking about. There's so much context that we can still understand what this God is okay with and what he's not. And it does not match up with the character of a perfectly just, loving, and truthful God. And like father, like son, Isaac lies about his wife, Rebecca, in the same fashion and is still blessed by God. So, issues everywhere. And these lies and deceptions seem contagious within the family because...
Okay, I thought we weren't going to talk about descriptions, Mindshift.
Yeah.
Just prescriptions. This is what I mean. You open your video saying, we're just going to go to the places God prescribes, and we just play with ambiguity and talk about a mere description. In terms of this, let me actually just show people a video so that they can see where I kind of actually address this, although that wasn't the main topic of the video. So in my series on challenging the documentary hypothesis, you'll see number 4 here, does the story of Abraham contradict? I actually cover that. Is that coming up or is it not coming up?
No, it's here. I see it.
Okay. I don't know why it didn't show up on my thing. Okay, there it goes. So number 4, I actually talk about that. And commentators actually talked about the story of Pharaoh. I think John Van Cedars, for example, is one of them, as well as I'm forgetting his name. T. Desmond Alexander as well is another one. Talk about how the story of Abraham in Egypt is meant to parallel the story of Abimelech, and the story of Abimelech is meant to provide additional context for what was going on in Egypt. So they're meant to parallel for a reason, to show that, yeah, Pharaoh actually was warned in this. So again, difference between a high context and a low context society. We have to remember the Bible is written in a high context society. They're not going to include a lot of the details we would like, but they are addressed. So specifically on this, just check out that video. It's addressed pretty well. Anything you want to add on that section there, Than, before I put the video back up?
Just the one thing I'll say about that is that deontological / versus virtue ethics distinction came into play there, right? He's like, well, this guy lied, which, by the way, is bad, and God doesn't say that was bad. Well, it's like, if you're a virtue ethicist, there's a lot of room here, because the context tells you exactly why he lied.
Yeah, that's another thing we need to keep in mind, is that, again, we're not... I am firmly convinced the Bible, especially the New Testament, lays down virtue ethics. It's not going to condemn every wrong action and tell you every good action or every morally right action. It's telling you virtues. And if you combine that with the high context society aspect, it makes a lot of these things make more sense. But check out the videos I've done on virtue ethics. Like, I have a video called Christian Virtue Ethics where I argue that. So, all right, let's continue on here.
As Rebecca then helps her son, Jacob, our second man we're going to point to here, deceive his father, Isaac. He wants the blessing that is not meant for him, that belongs to Esau, the one God hated from birth. And if you want the full context here, you can look at Genesis 27:19 and also 28:13 through 15. But Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing. And then obviously, since that blessing did go on Jacob, it means what? That God's hands are tied to the misunderstanding of Isaac because of the deception of Jacob. He just has to give this blessing. No, God could have stepped in and say, sorry, your son's tricking you. The birthright belongs to Esau. Let me make this right. But instead, God does this. Later, God appeared to Jacob and says, I am the Lord, the God of your father, Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying, effectively receiving the birthright of Esau. So I ask you, is this a description of something going on in the Bible where man is faulty, or through God's allowance of the blessing to be utilized through Jacob that would then become Israel? All of God's plans for his chosen people had to go this way, including the prophecy that God made of when they were still in the womb and one would serve the other. And God hated Esau and loved Jacob. It seems like God was totally on board with all this lying and deceit and confusion. Just to bring...
Okay, let's stop it there before we play the rest. It seems like God was totally on board with all this lying and deception. Where did you get that?
Yeah.
What do you have to say on that, Than? I'm gonna put some slides up here in a minute.
That's my exactly what you just asked. How do you get that God was okay with this, in the sense that God approved of it or thought it was good, rather than this is a concession to God's foreknowledge of what's going to happen?
Exactly. And since Mindshift has already granted the conception of foreknowledge, that will again change God's moral duties and obligations. Let me give an analogy I've used a lot. In 1 Samuel 8, what does God say? Says to Samuel, obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Samuel goes on to then warn them, hey, having a king is a bad idea. It's not what God wants. He'd rather just rule you directly. It's going to be horrible to have a king. He directly says that. But what happens in 2 Samuel? God tells David, your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. God says this was a bad idea, but I will work through it anyway. God works through sin, works through bad. And when it comes to Jacob and Esau, God's prophecy is not saying, I'm going to cause it. He's saying these are things that are going to happen, okay? Because of human free will, because of human sin. But God in his foreknowledge might go, you know what? I will look at this and I will go, you know what? Maybe I could use this. So what is God saying, or what does Joseph say in Genesis 50? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. God did not endorse Joseph being sold into slavery, but he used it. He used the human free will actions to bring about a better cause where that multiple people were saved. That doesn't mean he endorsed all of Joseph's behavior, which we'll get to in a little bit. That doesn't mean that he approved of the sin, but he works through that. With regards to the idea that do you want to say anything on that before I go to the whole he hated Esau thing?
Oh no, I had some stuff from Heiser and Robert Alter here on the hated thing, but you can go ahead.
All right, yeah, I'll say this and then you can say your spiel. But What we see is that hate in the Old Testament is often used hyperbolic. So when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Okay, Leah wasn't hated. It just more likely means love less. Commentators on Luke 4 note the same thing. Luke 14 will note the same thing. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, he cannot be my disciple. I can't find one commentator that notes this is just not hyperbole. Jesus does not mean it literally. G.B. Caird says hyperbole and overstatement is a figure of speech common to all languages, but among the Semitic people, its frequent use arises out of a habitual cast of mind, which I have called absoluteness, a tendency to think in extremes without qualification, in black and white without intervening shades. Douglas Moo, who's a Calvinist, but notes regarding Esau's hate. He says Jacob's love for Jacob will then refer to God's election of the people of Israel, not individuals, and his hatred of Esau correspondingly will denote the rejection of the nation of Edom. So it's not this idea that he actually hates the individual. These passages have been taken out of context. We're ignoring the hyperbole, ignoring the fact that God's talking about the election of nations here. So no, it's not that Esau was hated. And again, since God has foreknowledge, he can pick the best timeline that's going to work with human free will and sin to bring about a better purpose. He could very well see that working through Jacob is actually going to be a better result. Because actually, go on and say what you're going to say, and I'm going to find a book here. I just remembered something I want to add. But go on.
Yeah. All I can really add to that then is just other scholars you can look at here are some people like Heiser, who highlight that this word hate here, and specifically in the context of Jacob, I loved Esau, I hated, for instance, is just God's selection of Jacob for the covenantal blessings. So this isn't, like you said, this isn't some sort of emotional vitriol against Esau.
This is a great book by J.P. Fulkelman, Narrative Art and Genesis. He spends a lot of time on the Jacob account. And one of the things he notes is that God actually gets what he wants out of him, using his uncle to humble him and cause him to reap what he sows. So everything he does to Esau, his uncle, I forget his name, Lamech? No, it's not Lamech. Is it Laman? I forget the name of his uncle.
You're gonna bother me, but go ahead.
You look it up. But yeah, his uncle basically ends up like cheating him, conning him out of stuff, basically turning him into the humble person God needs him to be. So given that Jacob has to flee for his life with only his staff, he gets rock bottom. He's got to build himself back up. It's Laban. Thank you, Catholic Joe, for that. Thank you, Jedi Ghost Bear. Appreciate that. So yeah, basically it's a very interesting book that J.P. Fulkelman sort of lays out here about how God is actually using this whole thing to bring about a much humbler person. Not perfect, because he obviously still commits horrible actions later, but better, possibly given God's foreknowledge, a better result there with that. So that needs to be taken into account when we're looking at that. Anything else you want to add there? Or do you want to get back into that?
No, I'm good.
All right, let's continue on.
To bring about his will. Also, one of the things that the person IP was responding to, was bringing up, is how women are objects. And I covered that within Abraham. But polygamy in general is something that is never specifically prescribed by God in the Bible, but it is an obvious necessary outcome for the other prophecies that God intends to fulfill, like the 12 tribes coming from Jacob. Well, Jacob had multiple wives to bring that to fruition. And many of our patriarchs had multiple wives. And we never once see any of this condemned by God. If marriage was really between one man and one woman, then maybe every single man that was, of course, just a product of their time and place, and thus had multiple wives. If biblically wrong, though, we should have seen this condemned by God, not worked through by God. So something to point out why we are in Jacob, but let's continue to move down the line.
Nope, let's stop talking about polygamy first here, because I actually would argue no, God actually does condemn it.
Yeah, go ahead, because my question again is just going to be like, because he made a claim, if this was wrong, you wouldn't see God working through it. My question there is just, why?
Well, yeah. Why can't God? I mean, given how evil humanity is, who is God supposed to work through? Where, it's like, I forget the origin of the quote, but he says, where are these angels you're going to find who are going to run society? It's like, there aren't any angels that exist in this world. God has to work through imperfect people. Yeah. But there was a great article that came out a while ago, Angelo Tossato, and other scholars have endorsed this as well. So his paper, I've seen cited in multiple books, argues that the law of Leviticus 18:18 actually does outlaw polygamy. The verse is, and you shall not take a woman as a rival wife to her sister, uncovering her nakedness while her sister is still alive. And he notes this often is an idiomatic expression. It was read, "And you shall not take a woman as a rival wife to another," and consequently was interpreted as a law against polygamy and divorce. The prohibition of taking a wife is explicitly justified in the first place by the fact that this would represent, i.e. making an enemy or rival of the first wife. So basically there's a prohibition in the Levitical law, or I hate calling it law because it's not a law. It's more like Proverbs, but you get the idea. There's a prohibition against this idea that this is actually bad or immoral to actually take multiple wives. So yeah, there very well could be. And my brother-in-law, David Wilbur, has done some more videos and articles on this. I think he even wrote a book on polygamy in a while back. So there's a lot of good stuff on this. But yeah, Angelos Tosato's article is a great place to start on there. So yeah, there very well is a plausible case that God actually does outlaw polygamy.
Huh.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah, send me that paper.
No, you get it yourself.
Okay.
No, I'll send it to you. Just remind me later. Otherwise, I will forget because, I get busy. All right, let's continue on.
And go to Joseph for number 3. And by the way, before we do, I just want to show you why I think this kind of education is important and how IP is either just taking the ease of which we can make these kinds of statements and not choosing to look at the context or the times that God prescribes the bad. Because look at the comments from IP's video. Godly doesn't mean we are perfect. That's what a lot of people misunderstand. I love when they use Christian morality to try and vilify Christianity, laugh out loud. Anti-theist favorite terms, objects, property. We're not the ones that wrote that in the Bible. When God says you can own other people as property and we point that word out, that doesn't make it our favorite word. It makes it one of your God's commands. It's always fascinating to me when people say, well, look at the terrible things that your holy man did. Obviously, your God supports it, while also ignoring all of the punishments these men suffered as a result. It always fascinates me when people only look at the times God punished the bad behavior they don't like, instead of all the times that God prescribed it. That's why I'm making this video. And I could go on forever. But lastly here, it's interesting that they can't tell the difference between the Bible describing versus commanding. If the Bible were fake, why would it plainly record the moral failings of its heroes? I hear this stuff all the time. I'm not the one that can't distinguish the difference between the Bible describing and commanding. Christians are the ones who only look at the Bible describing and not all of the horror that God commands. So let's help out in that.
Okay. With all due respect, sir. I mean, you're not though. You're listing descriptions and playing with the ambiguity of the passage, like you did with the Jacob example, and assuming God endorsed this. And again, don't take my commenters, my followers' comments out of context. They were specifically commenting on one video where this lovely young woman made an argument from Lot in his horrible actions he did with his daughters, that kind of thing. They have every right to comment those things in that context. Don't expect them to know the future or be responding to other objections that were going to be later brought up, like yourself has brought up. We got to take things in context, as you said.
I was just kind of astounded by the whole I'm not the one that can't delineate between prescriptions and descriptions, but we haven't had any actual clear-cut moral prescriptions yet so far.
Yeah, I know. All right, let's continue on.
Out in that endeavor, let's get back on track. Number 3, Joseph. So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. So the larger context here is there's this famine going on in Egypt, or about to. Joseph interprets the dream for the Pharaoh. He gets put in charge of preparations, and then obviously through purposeful scheming, takes the grain from the Egyptians only to sell it back to them at the point of starvation so that he can own all their property. These are incredibly dubious actions. And again, these Egyptians sold their land, their livestock, and then eventually even themselves just to stay alive. So where's God's prescription of all of this? The narrative obviously suggests that God's guidance was with Joseph as he made all of these plans and actions. He's the one that gave Joseph the abilities to find favor from the Pharaoh to be put in a position to do this. And we see it fulfill God's will, which of course is the only thing that matters in this might makes right divine command theory, because later Joseph is able to help establish his people with the better lands as these things are being redistributed and planned out. And you wonder why right after this, the Israelites find themselves in slavery back to Egypt. And the reason I bring up this specific example is because it is about God's chosen people versus God's non-chosen people, or Israelites and Gentiles, foreigners, however you want to say it. It's the same thing we saw with Hagar versus Sarah, with Isaac versus Ishmael. Who cares if what we're doing is wrong for other people? It's all about what side you're on. And the time that these men do get punished for their incorrect actions is when they are breaking God's law that affects God's plan for his chosen people. Once you start to see that.
Okay.
There's a lot there.
A lot here. This is purely a description, sir. None of this is endorsed by God. Again, go back to what Genesis 50:20 says. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. The Joseph account directly says that God uses evil men to bring about good. Nowhere in this description is God prescribing what Joseph is doing after he saved all these lives. And I think this fits in with an overall biblical theme, actually, especially in Genesis. In Genesis, you often see patriarch, man brought up, does something for God, but then after he commits evil. Great example is Noah. Noah does something great for God, but then what does he do? He gets drunk, curses his grandson, all of that bad. He fails, just like Adam did. Okay. Joseph, another example, brought up by God to do something great. And what does he do after? Starts doing things he probably shouldn't do. This is a common theme we see throughout when it comes to biblical prophets and patriarchs, that, they do the task for God and then they fail miserably. It's not a strict pattern. And I'm not saying that's always the way it is, but we do see that reoccurring theme quite often. But I mean, again, none of this is a prescription here. Like I fail to see why this was even brought up in the video.
Yeah, I'm wondering the same thing. And he brought up divine command theory here, which is kind of confusing because he's treating ethics like deontology in one section, and now he's treating it as if it's just pure divine command theory, might makes right. And I don't see that as part of the meta narrative of the Old Testament in any way, shape, or form. There's no, we're the strong ones, so we're the right ones kind of happening in the Old Testament at all. That's not what's going on here in the Joseph account. The whole point of all of this is like cosmic conflict, cosmic redemption. What is the whole entire point? What is the purpose of the Old Testament and God's inner working and election of Israel and all this other stuff? It's not might makes right.
Yeah, and now there's another important point he says here, so I want to back it up to make sure we get the full context here, because this is another thing I think he concedes that I want to bring up later.
Who cares if what we're doing is wrong for other people? It's all about what side you're on. And the time that these men do get punished for their incorrect actions is when they are breaking God's law that affects God's plan for his chosen people. Once you start to see that.
Okay. Lot said right there. The times these men do get punished is when they are breaking God's plan for his chosen people. I heard that and I was like, yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. God has a right to punish everyone, and he is so merciful. He's only punishing people when they're interfering with his plan to bring about the Messiah, the salvation of the world, the eschaton, these kinds of things. So God is not this guy that's like, I'm going to punish. Like Mindshift just said it right there. It's implicit in his argument. God is actually being quite merciful. He could have punished Abraham for giving his wife to Pharaoh. He could have punished Jacob much more harshly than sending him to Laban and having him go through all that. But he's so merciful. He's like, I'm going to not, because I need to keep, because I'm only going to punish when it's interfering with my plan. That's a pretty good standard to see this way, these things through. Because at that point, God looks far more merciful of that, if that's the case, that he's not going to punish sin, except when it's going to interfere with his plan where he wants to bring about a better world.
Yeah, I got nothing else to add there, I don't think.
I mean, yeah, it's an interesting concession, and that's the point I think we've been making for a while. Like, this just shows God's mercy when he could be punishing people. He's not, because he's being merciful.
It's for his chosen people.
The last thing that just came in my mind was just like, look, if we want God to just press his judgment button and punishment button every single time anybody does anything wrong, but God also wants to work through humans to accomplish his will, well, we're never going to get anywhere.
Exactly.
Once you start to see that so clearly, the story is not so beautiful. You can't just attach John 3:16, for God so loved the whole world, and say, look, God is always good, always just, all the time for everyone. No, he is not. He's extremely hypocritical and indecisive and inconsistent for when it suits him and his purposes and his people best. And
that's not an inconsistency, though. You just said that God is only going to punish people when they're interfering with his plan. That's not God being inconsistent. That's a pretty consistent strategy there. I'm going to be merciful as much as possible, but sometimes I do have to step in if certain sinners are going to interfere with my plan. That's not God being inconsistent. You just put down a pretty good principle showing God isn't being inconsistent.
Yeah.
And it does make the story better because we see God being continually merciful and still trying to bring about this plan and still trying to work through sinners instead of just destroying everyone despite how evil they are. I mean, Mindshift has already conceded that Abraham, Jacob, Isaac are bad people in ways, yet God is still merciful to them. He's only unleashing punishment or justice when it needs to happen so that the plan of God can unfold.
Even within his people, the ones that he favors, like Jacob over Esau, for whatever plan he wants to bring about. So yes, talking about the morally horrific behavior of these patriarchs, leading men of God, and understanding God's use of them and their bad behavior, not despite their bad behavior, is absolutely telling about the character of this God of the Bible. Let's
Again, Genesis 50:20, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Just as God is working through bad people, that is not an argument that God is endorsing that behavior. And there are numerous examples we can draw from.
move on to one where we're going to have to limit ourselves. Number 4, Moses. Moses did so many horrific things that God did not prescribe, like when he first kills the Egyptian taskmaster. Oh, Brandon, that was a good thing. Why was that a good thing? Well, because that man was treating his slave poorly. Oh, so murdering him was just? Because I hear this all the time when I bring up this kind of an example. Didn't I just give you a story about where Abraham and Sarah forcefully impregnated and then mistreated their slave? Did God kill them because it was just, or did he return the slave and tell her to submit further before exiling her so as not to cause problems for his chosen beloved Isaac? Do you see what I mean about it just depends which side of the fence you're on? So again, Moses did tons of stuff that was obviously bad that God just doesn't say boo about. But there's plenty of times where what Moses is doing that is bad is commanded from God. Let's talk about a few of those. How about all the plagues of Egypt? God commands it, and then God takes credit for it. Well, the Egyptians had it coming. Did they, or did Pharaoh? And did Pharaoh, or did God harden his heart so he could continue to do these things? See this video for more information. So even though Christians have justifications at the ready for why these things were okay, here is God commanding Moses to do obvious morally incorrect behavior like killing children when we look at the last plague that had nothing to do with this whatsoever, and God being the one who prescribed it. On the same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. And then the instructions for the blood magic to protect his special people. That's not a description, that's a prescription. How about Moses killing the Midianites?
All right, before we get to the Midianites one, which I will address in detail, do you want to talk about this one at all? I can add some stuff in there if you want to go first.
So I'm not going to get into terrible depth here. There's so much literature on this topic. When it comes to the 10 plagues, right? Nobody's going to just say like, yeah, all the Egyptians had it coming and that's it.
Anytime someone says that, I just hear that song, like, he had it coming. He had it coming.
Yeah. If you hold somebody that reads the Bible and you hold to divine council theology and you think that the Israelites thought the Egyptian gods were real and all this other stuff, this is cosmic conflict stuff. Like, this is not, Exodus even talks about it. This is a judgment on the gods of Egypt. This is divine warfare stuff happening. It's not just against the Egyptians or anything like that. That's part of this. If we want to talk about the firstborn, I don't know where he's getting the idea that God just targeted babies.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't.
Yeah,
that's not said in the text at all.
Well, no, and David Falk has talked about this. We talked about this in Exodus Rediscover a little bit. The documentary I put out on the evidence for the Exodus is that it's not the first biological children that are being targeted. It's the heir designated.
Yeah. So
in ancient Egypt, you could designate an heir that wasn't even your own kid, because eunuchs could get heirs at times. So you could have an heir designator, and that's who's being targeted. A lot like Ramesses II, Exodus Pharaoh, his son who died, we would argue died in the plague, was a full-grown adult. And these are not innocent people. These are also people that are engaging in the oppression of Israel here. So it doesn't say babies. You're absolutely right. I would say it's probably more just speaking hyperbolically and just targeting certain heir designators specifically in P. Ramesses.
Yeah.
But yeah, continue on.
The other thing, just kind of adding on to that, you could just say, you could read some stuff like the Midrash Tanhuma, both for, and I don't know how to pronounce all that. But if you read it, it says, when they refused to repent, he killed their important men. As it is said, the Lord smote all their firstborn.
Mm-hmm.
Like even like some early Jewish interpretations here are gonna hold. It seems like they're holding this idea that the firstborn that are smote here is more for like political upheaval, structural upheaval of the Egyptians because of the way they're treating the Israelites. Yeah,
and I would again argue there's a lot of hyperbolic language happening in the account. I mean, like, I don't think literally every chariot in Egypt chased after them.
Yeah.
This is just standard ancient Near Eastern hyperbole in a lot of ways, which we'll get to when we get to the Joshua account. So that will apply context for there. I did want to share my screen and show some things on the hardening of heart, unless there was anything else you wanted to say.
No, go ahead.
All right. So oftentimes in the biblical accounts, God is given active verbal forms for things he only lets passively happen. These are very good examples in Exodus 5. So the taskmaster, so Pharaoh says, I will not give you straw. Go ahead and get your straw yourselves wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced in the least. Moses then says, oh, why have you done evil to this people, O Lord? Okay, Pharaoh did it, not Moses, or not God. But God is given sort of like sort of said in the way that he did it, because oftentimes in the biblical text, God is given active verbal forms when only passive. He's only allows things to passively happen. Another example is in 1 Chronicles 10. Saul kills himself. He commits suicide. What does 1 Chronicles 10 say? He did not seek guidance from the Lord. Therefore, the Lord put him to death. Okay, well, God did not put Saul to death. God only let Saul kill himself. He passively let it happen. This is a slide from one of my TikTok videos. Active verbal forms were used by the Hebrews to express not the doing of the thing, but the permission of the thing which the agent is said to do. Active verbs are used to express not the doing of the thing, but the occasion of the thing being done. Now, this is an older work, but you kind of get the idea here. Oftentimes in the biblical text, God is given credit for things when he's only passively letting it happen. And I would argue that's what's sort of going on with the hardness of hearts. I know you mentioned Michael Heiser has some stuff on that as well.
Yeah, he does. Me find. I lost it on my notes. Where'd it go?
What is this? Amateur hour thing?
I know. Oh, so Heiser just points out, for instance, in some places where the hardening of heart, he like kind of interprets this as an indirect thing. So imagine you're the Pharaoh, right? And you see the Israelites having babies and stuff like that. They're growing numbers. You see that as a threat. And then all of a sudden you have the God of Israel showing partiality to them. Well, that's going to have some indirect like influence on the way that you feel towards that God of Israel and towards the Israelites. And so that's like one way that you can take this on as well as Heiser's view. Other scholars like Tim Mackey have just shown like the pattern of the hardening of the heart is really important to take into account. Like this isn't some deterministic thing. Right. And there's a translation issue as well. So like Pharaoh's heart became hard for the Hebrew word kazak. It's a state of verb and it doesn't specify like anybody that's initiating an action. And so like if you look at some more theologically deterministic translations, like the ESV translation, for instance, you'll see was hardened instead, implying that God is actually doing something or passively doing something rather than something more like passive and independent of God himself.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of conversation around this. There's a lot more about that. I don't think it's that clear cut. And again, we're just providing defeaters at this point.
Yeah.
Because Mindshift is playing with the ambiguity. If that's the case, we can offer defeaters and then employ the principle of charity as a combatant against this. And so if that's the argument, again, if he's just playing with ambiguity, that's all we need to do in this situation.
Killing the Midianites. Let me read to you from Numbers 31. I didn't encourage you to go read verses 1 through 18. Here's 17. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. Here we specifically see the killing of young children, boys, women who had nothing to do with anything going on as long as they weren't useful because they weren't virgins, and then the capture, the taking, the kidnapping of young virginal women. And I'm not talking about 19-year-olds that hadn't had sex yet. I'm talking about little girls. Take them for yourselves. Whatever do you think that was for? Well, Brandon, don't you know they actually married them? So, God made it right. Otherwise, what would have happened to these women, to these girls? God would have had to kill them or they would have starved to death without the provision from all the men that were just genocided. So this is a grace. Now they're with the correct righteous people group. You can call it whatever you want. This is genocide with a select preference for little girls, for full-grown Israelite soldiers to kidnap and rape. I don't care if you put a marriage certificate on it or not. And was this just Moses who commanded this and we described it? Or was this God's prescription to Moses for the people? Then my mind goes back to thinking about those.
You didn't answer your question.
What's the answer?
Didn't answer the question. Don't worry. Don't worry. I'll provide the answer here. I did this in my debate with Daniel Hakikachu. So I can just pull up my slides from when I had my debate with Daniel Hakikachu. Because remember, he wanted to argue in favor of child marriage. And I knew he was going to bring this passage up. So, okay. Here's the passage. Okay. Notice what God says in Numbers 31. The Lord spoke to Moses, avenge the people of Israel on the Midianites. Afterwards, you shall be gathered to your people. That's it. That's all God commands. He doesn't say, take the girls. He just says, avenge your people. So make war on them. What happens later? Moses and Eleazar, the priest, and all the chiefs of the congregation went up to meet outside the camp. And Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds, who had come up with this service in war. Okay, so we see a distinction here. That's not me saying that. That's Robert Alter. Moses' command, one should note that it is Moses, not God. Okay? Paul Copan, this seems to be Moses' command solely, a command beyond what God had actually ordered and what has been carried out here. Okay? Pekka Pitkanen says something similar. Moses is the one who is angry here. Now, also, God also seems to be against this, because in Deuteronomy 20, he says, Lord your God will give into your hands, you shall put all its males to the sword, but the women and the little ones, the livestock and everything else in the city and all its spoils, you shall take as plunder, and you shall enjoy the spoils for your enemies, which your God has given you. Now, this is talking about fighting people far off, like the Midianites, not people in Canaan. It does not say to put the children to death or the animals. Okay. It does not say you can take them as sex slaves. So as even Dennis T. Olson notes, Deuteronomy 20 should be in view when Numbers 31 is happening here. So Moses is directly going against what God, says is just war in that time and culture in this later passage here. So it's not as clear cut as he's making it out to be. And again, Robert Alter is very clear. Paul Copan is clear. This isn't commanded by God. This is, again, another description here, which we've argued for extensively. This is Moses acting out of his anger. And at this point, Moses is already under a death sentence. So God is still working through Moses as part of his plan, but Moses already has a death sentence at this point for his sin. So, what else is supposed to be done here? I don't know what else to say on this. Anything you want to add?
Not really.
Yeah. This
is again just the whole. I mean, he asked the question: is this description or prescription? Doesn't answer it, and this whole video is supposed to be about prescriptions from God, doing about things that are clearly immoral being good, and again, we don't have that. So
right. We once again have God working through immoral people, which is the main point we're making. We're not saying Moses was moral here at all. We're directly condemning Moses in this situation. I'm on board.
The other thing I'll just add in is, if you remember in the beginning of the stream, I mentioned how he's anticipating Christian objections that a lot of Christian scholars are just not going to make. Like, right. Like how can we get some anticipations of what scholars like Alter and William Webb and Gordon Ostie and others are going to say, or are we just going to go with what the easiest Christian thinkers to take on are going to go with?
Yeah. And again, I think Numbers 31 is horrible. God does not endorse it. God does not prescribe it. Again, what is going on? Okay. Moses is acting out of anger. The text directly tells us that. Okay. I think if we read Proverbs, we understand that's not the way we're supposed to act, is act out of anger in these type of situations. Okay. God is still working through immoral and bad people here. The Midianites are bad in this situation. The Israelites through Moses are bad in this situation. Okay. What is God supposed to do? Just kill everyone, end it all? I'd like to know, because again, the argument is that God is not punishing people when they're acting sinful. But then again, if that was the case, the argument, if this is an internal critique, is that all of humanity would be wiped out, because there are no perfect people for God to work through. So yeah. Again, it's also I'd like to add the idea of moral progress, because you and I have talked about this. Okay. We don't look at the early Hebrews, Moses, as like moral standards for Christians to mimic or act like. We look at these as imperfect people, and they're far back on the chain of moral progress here. Like, they're acting in their time and their culture, and God is working through that time and culture. Similar to the examples I gave earlier with the British working in India, or us working, or Westerners working in Saudi Arabia, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right, let me put this back up here and let's continue on, see what else he has to say.
Comments from those self-righteous Christians on IP's video about how stupid we are for not being able to tell the difference between a command and a description. Are they just ignorant of verses like these? Are they?
No, Mindshift. They're responding to the one specific video and the one specific claim made in the video. Please take my viewers' comments in context. You can't get mad at them. Like, this is like someone like, it's like I'm having a conversation and she's like, well, why did Lot do those bad things? And I'm like, well, it was bad. God didn't endorse it. And then Mindshift comes out from the bush and goes, yeah, but what about Numbers 31? I wasn't talking to you, sir. We were talking about this other topic. Okay. We can talk about that. That's what we're doing here now. We'll talk about it, but don't get mad at us for not addressing the argument in front of our faces.
Are they so twisted up in following this God that they've made the moral compromise to try and justify what otherwise they would never, ever justify in any other case in all of history for any other God or culture? Or are they hypocrites who know this and don't care? Are they purposeful deceivers who don't want to bring this up? I don't know what the excuse is. I just know that it's inexcusable. Now, we're getting into the territory where we're going to cover a lot of genocides and murders that are going to include a lot of children and things like this. And let me just say for the record, I know the Christian arguments about these people were so evil, or these people worshiped a God that demanded child sacrifice, or these people were the Nephilim, and so they had to be snuffed out because they were demon spawned. I don't care what level, again, of excuse you're trying to make. If the only thing that this all-powerful God could come up with was full genocide or complete destruction of women, children, livestock, and cities, despite the men, sure, wars had to happen, that's fine. But if you zoom out and you understand that most of the time these things happen because God caused the division in the first place, or God chose to have a chosen people in the first place, or God didn't reveal himself to these other people, so they were doing nothing but following their culture, or that these...
Okay, there's a lot of assumptions there that are not justified. How do we know God didn't reveal himself to these people? What is wrong with God having a chosen people that he's going to use to be a light to the nations or to bless all humanity as he does through Abraham? Assumptions not justified here. Okay. How do we know God caused this division? Like, that's another assumption not justified.
Yeah.
These people that are doing these horrendous things are doing the exact kind of things that the Israelites are doing under God's command, by the way. Then all of those ridiculous justifications for killing children and women, they completely fail. So keep that in mind as I tell you some more of these. How about the Levite purge? So this is after the golden calf incident. We're going to get 3,000 people that are murdered here. I'll read to you from Exodus 32, 27 through 28. Then he, Moses, said to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. Prescription. Each man strap a sword to his side, go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor. The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Yeah, Brandon, they made a false idol. Okay. Moses worshiped.
One really interesting thing about that passage is, let's just say this out. It says, Moses said, this is what the Lord commands. And then notice what the passage ends with. The passage ends with, the Levites did as the Lord commanded. It says the Levites did as Moses commanded. So perhaps the author's even playing with that, saying that maybe Moses is actually exaggerating a command or coming up with a command that God didn't say. However, even if we grant that, even if we grant that this command did come from the Lord, as we said at the opening of the video, this is an internal critique. God has a right to end life whenever he sees fit to bring about a better plan or his purpose. We have people engaging in direct sin and idolatry after they literally just watch God unleash plagues, rescue them from the Red Sea, these kinds of things, leading them as a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. Listen, if you're seeing God literally in front of you as a pillar of fire or as a pillar of smoke, and you're still saying, no, I'm not going to do what you command, that's a pretty dangerous position to be in. You literally have all the proof you need that God is real and has power, and you're still disobeying. Okay, now we're entering some pretty dangerous territory. Anything you want to add to that, or you want to keep going?
No, I'm anticipating that, if I remember correctly, there's a lot more passages he goes over about war stuff, and I'm just kind of waiting until we hit the stuff.
Okay. Moses worshipped false gods too when he was in Egypt for lack of understanding. God showed grace. God revealed himself to him. These people that didn't have a chance to do this as well, because God's presence was reserved early on for just special occasions with just special men. Do we blame them for making the same mistakes?
Okay, but he just sort of answered his own question there, because God showed grace for Moses when he was ignorant. The Israelites at this point are not ignorant. They have seen God unleash plagues on Egypt, part the Red Sea, lead them as a pillar of fire. That's not the same status as his example with Moses prior to these things when he's worshiping other gods. You now have clear proof of God and his clear power, and you're still rebelling. So, that is a far different circumstance than the one he's laying out here.
Isn't there a better way God could have dealt with this? But I get when you're a Christian and you hear these things, you're like, these people had it coming. How gross, how sad to think so little of your God, the most all-powerful, all-loving, all-forgiving, all-just creator of the universe. What little expectation you must have for what that kind of being could and should actually be like. Of course,
Okay. Earlier, he was mad that Jacob and Abraham are not being punished. Now he's mad that the Israelites are being punished. Which is it? Like,
Yeah.
this is what I mean. It's God is damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. What is it supposed to be here? So again, a lot of problems here. So you have people that, again, have clear proof of God engaging in blatant idolatry when they should know better. And again, even if we grant that this command did come from God, which the text doesn't even directly say, it says Moses says this, and then they did as Moses commanded. So that's also another defeater for this. But also, it's not the same comparison here. And again, God is damned if he punishes people, damned if he doesn't punish people. What is it supposed to be? I go back to the principle Mindshift laid out. God is merciful as much as he could possibly be, but he will not be merciful. He will allow punishments to come out if you're directly interfering with his plan, which does qualify in this situation.
So we can move on to verses like 20:16 through 18. However, in the cities of the nations, the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, as if there's not people and children and families living there already. Do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. And then he lists a bunch: the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded.
By the way, I know you want to talk on this, so let me know when you want me to stop.
Yeah.
You. Not descriptive. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do and worship their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. This is interesting because most of the time, Christians like to try to justify this. They always go to Moloch, which was a god of only some of these people, that only some of the people actually did child sacrifice to. But God is clear here. He doesn't want intermingling. We see this all over the Old Testament. This is the reason for utterly destroying all of them, because his people who have supposedly seen his glory, who supposedly have the one and only God, would otherwise be so easily swayed to these incorrect ideas. Is God so insecure? This is the only thing he can think to do. What if he went and revealed himself to all of those tribes, made it clear that he's the only God? Then they could all intermingle because it wouldn't be an issue. Or maybe God doesn't have to send his chosen people into an inhabited land. They've been wandering around for 40 years. Why not?
Isn't all land basically inhabited at this point? And again, most land on Earth, or a lot of places on land, are actually inhabitable for most people because of deserts, climate issues. I mean, that's another thing to consider. And he's also just not even granted the assumption that maybe God actually did reveal himself to these people. Again, God says in Genesis to Abraham, you don't get this land yet because the sin of the Amorites has not come to full fruition. Like, so it's not actually gotten to where it's going to end up. So I'm being merciful with them, but I know where they're going to end up. So there is already sort of an implication in there that something may have already been warned.
Why not snap Moses' fingers or raise?
Anything you want to add?
No, we're almost at the end of this little stint of, well, I don't know when he's done. I don't remember when he's done talking about like war text or anything like that, but
yeah, we'll get there.
Not snap Moses' fingers or raise his staff and have utopia pop up, paradise in the desert, complete with fortified walls and everything. No bloodshed needed. And if you think that's asking too much because things need to happen naturally, trust me, in the destruction of all of those tribes, nothing was natural. God guided the hand. God did miracle after miracle to make sure that they got victory. This is beyond inexcusable. There's plenty more.
So the answer to that is quite simple. God gave humans utopia in Eden, and we destroyed it and ruined it. You're going to give sinful humans that have degraded so far from Eden, you're going to give them Eden again. What do you think is going to happen? They're going to misuse it, quite frankly. And again, if God, Mindshift has already granted God has foreknowledge. God could very well know in his foreknowledge, if he did that in the desert, it may not lead to an actual good result. Maybe they need to be in a land that's imperfect so they can learn how to tow and soil. Why did I say so? I don't know anything about farming, but you get the idea. Okay. And know how to actually plow and tow or these kinds of things, because it might actually be important for moral progress or moral growth. Just giving everything to them on a silver platter may be the worst thing. After all, we're talking about the Israelites, the people that were complaining in the desert after they saw God feed them miraculously, rescue them through the Red Sea, send them quail for meat when they complain, and they still complained and wanted to go back to Egypt. Yet these people should be given paradise. Again, God says over and over, these are stiff-necked people. God didn't choose them because they're so good and so great. God chose them out of his divine providence. So, I mean, again, if you raise kids, you understand basically you just can't give your kids everything they want because they'll become spoiled. They'll misuse it. They won't appreciate the things they got. God in his foreknowledge could see that very well with the Israelites as well.
Yeah. Now that we're done with all this stuff, it seems like he's also just implying that this is actual genocide and everybody's getting killed and all this other stuff. We kind of hit on this when we did our Satan's Guide to the Bible response, so I'll just be really brief, but I think this is just ancient Near Eastern war rhetoric. I don't think that this is actually like everybody's dead. We're going to wipe out everybody, nothing alive, right? So you can talk about how there's in ancient Near East, there's different, like for instance, numerical hyperboles. You can see this with Egyptian King Seti I, and all these other people. You can see severity hyperbole. So like with the Egyptian account of the Battle of Kadesh, you can see this as well with Ramses II's account. And there's so many other like places you can point to here. And the whole entire point here is like, look, I think what you find in all of these is going to be a lot of different war rhetoric. And it's not actual like total kill stuff that's going on. You're going to find places that are contradictory, and what I mean by that is like, look, if it was total kill, wipe out the whole entire geography, all the people, well then why would we say certain things like don't go and intermarry with them and all this other stuff later on? So
yeah, we can get into that. I'm gonna play a little bit of the Joshua section, then I might play a clip from Richard Hess.
Cool.
Plenty more for Moses, and we're going to have to speed this up. Let's move on to Joshua. Same thing at the destruction of Jericho, Joshua 6:17 and 21. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she was willing to lie for the right side, because lies are totally okay when it helps God's cause.
No, lies are okay in virtue ethics, sir. Okay, again, this is the thing. Jeremiah lies at one point. I've even said that, there might be a lie in John, I believe 7 or 8, for example. No, in virtue ethics, it is perfectly justifiable to lie in situations. And the obvious example is if you were living in Nazi Germany hiding Jews and the Nazis ask, are you hiding Jews? The moral thing to do is to lie. Okay, we're not Kantian. We don't hold to our Kantian ethics here. We hold to virtue ethics. In Kantian ethics, you could make this argument. But in virtue ethics, in ancient ethics, no, lying can be moral in certain circumstances if it's the virtuous thing to do, if you're going to help people. And I could cite philosophers like G.M. Anscombe on this, or Bernard Williams is another great one. I mean, yeah, don't assume deontic ethics.
Cause they devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle and sheep and donkeys. This is not hyperbole. We know it's not hyperbole because of the examples of when people don't follow this to the letter of the law, like when they left some boys alive and Moses had them all murdered, or when Saul left the king and some goats alive and then Saul lost his kingdom because he lost his favor from God for not following it to the letter of the law. Just really picture it. I know that we can't get ourselves to think about the innocent men that were in.
Okay, so he says it's not hyperbole, Than. He said right there it's not hyperbole.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Richard Hess says it's not hyperbole, but Richard Hess has an explanation for this. You want me to play that, or you want to say something before I do that? All right, let me pull up Richard Hess here. I think I got it to the right moment. Yeah, here's where he addresses that exact passage. I'll play about 3 minutes of this, but you can watch the whole full lecture if you want.
What does the text actually say? The Hebrew has Me'ish ve'ad isha, which is literally that text that says men and women is literally from man to woman. And I would argue that this is simply a stereotypical or standard way of saying everyone in it, without necessarily saying that, yes, there were men, there were women, there were donkeys, there were sheep. This is a list. In fact, that term, from man to woman, which is found in this verse and in the one at I, occurs 7 times in the Bible. It occurs with reference to I in the similar text. It occurs, with reference to Amalek that Israel defeats, Saul defeats in 1 Samuel 15.
That was another passage Mindshift brought up.
With reference to Nob, that priestly village north of Jerusalem that is eliminated and destroyed by Saul's army for helping David. It refers to Jerusalem. From man to woman refers to all the people that David had invited and brought and celebrated with him the bringing of the ark into Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 6. And again, Nehemiah refers to it in Nehemiah 8. Later on, it refers to all Israel in 2 Chronicles 15. All the occurrences except Nob, where children are specifically mentioned, and it said that Saul did this. Of course, it was not by any means in God's will. All other occurrences precede or follow the statement from man to woman with the word kol, meaning everyone. So what they're saying is this is a way of saying everyone, and it's a stereotypical phrase for everyone in a town or region without assuming anything more about age or gender. In and of itself, the statement is not saying they had to kill non-combatants any more than it says they had to kill a donkey. Somebody finds some donkeys to kill. It's just that if they were there, then they were killed. That's the way I see it and understand this phrase and the actual grammar of the text. Jericho, for Jericho, all I take with reference to warriors. Basically, Jericho was a fort garrisoned by the hill country cities in order to provide defense, but also collect taxes for people moving back and forth. They had someone like Rahab there, who I believe was basically responsible for running an inn, and perhaps with her family. And that is, and that makes sense too, because you'll remember, again, in the story of the Good Samaritan, he takes, the Samaritan takes the injured individual back down to Jericho and to an inn there. So that's what was there. But that's exceptional. Only Rahab is mentioned. Of course, she is delivered and saved from this destruction, whereas the rest of the figures face death.
All right, I'll play this about 3 minutes. I think that you can watch the rest if you want to know more. But basically, his point is it's not hyperbole. It's a stereotypical phrase. You just say everyone. So everyone died. That doesn't mean it was filled with women and children, because it was a fort where typically men would basically garrison at, with the exception, of course, the inn, the prostitute, that kind of thing. So no, you don't even have to argue that's hyperbole. You can argue that's a stereotypical phrase just to say, yeah, they killed everyone, which would have been the combatants, because it's a fort, not a village. So again, there's a lot of ancient Near Eastern context there.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add?
No, not at least for this stream.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'll just be repeating everything I said in a different one.
Yeah. Here's the thing also, is that most of what we see in Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy is not the command to commit genocide. It's to drive them out of the lands. And Copan and Flanagan actually calculated this. They said the words grouped into two categories: dispossession versus destruction. Dispossession would include words that drive out, dispossess, take over, possession of, thrust out. 33 occurrences. Destruction words would include annihilate, destroy, perish, and eliminate. 11 occurrences. The dispossession words would indicate that the population ran away, migrated out of land prior to any encounter with the Israelites. Destruction words would indicate the consequence of those who stayed behind. What then is the mix of these two sets of words? The disposition words outnumber the destruction words 3-1. This would indicate that the dominant intended effect was for the people of the promised land to migrate somewhere else. And their point is that the destruction texts are being used in a hyperbolic sense throughout Numbers, Exodus, Deuteronomy, basically in the sense of drive them out. Like, you're going to destroy these civilizations by driving them out, kind of thing. We also see clearly in Joshua and Judges that there's still many, many people there. I mean, Joshua directly says, do not mix with the people that are still living in Canaan. Yeah. Obviously, there was many, many people still there. Note about hyperbole, but numerous scholars have noted this. While Joshua does speak of Israel's utterly destroying the Canaanites, even these accounts can give misleading impression. When a city is in danger of falling, people do not simply wait there to be killed. They get out. That may be one reason why peoples that have been annihilated have no trouble reappearing later in the story. After Judah puts Jerusalem to the sword, its occupants are still living there to this day in Judges 1-8-21. So we see a lot of this ancient Near Eastern hyperbole. K. Lawson Younger Jr. says, while there are differences, the Hebrew conquest account of Canaan in Joshua 9-12 is by and large typical of any ancient Near Eastern account. Some of the examples you mentioned, like we see the stele of Tutmosis III. He says, the great army of Mitanni, it is overthrown in the twinkling of an eye. It has perished completely, even though Mitanni is still so powerful that when Amenhotep II comes along, he makes a treaty with them and they become peaceful brothers. So obviously the entire army of Mitanni was not overthrown. This is hagiographic hyperbole. The Merneptah stele, of course, says Israel is laid waste, his seed is ruined. Obviously hyperbole. Mesha stele says, again, Israel has utterly perished forever. Obviously not true, even to this day. Sennacherib says, the soldiers of hear me, dangerous enemies I cut with the sword, not one escaped. I made the mountain empty. I made the mountains empty of all humanity. Okay, this obviously scholars recognize this as ancient Near Eastern hyperbole, and these are examples that Younger brings up in his book. We see this in the Joshua conquest, when Joshua and the sons of Israel finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out. And when the remnant that remained of them had entered into the remnant, I thought they were wiped out. Well, it's hyperbole. That's the point. A lot of this is hyperbolic language being employed in the account, or using stereotypic language, as Hess pointed out with Joshua 6. We can call it a hagiographic account of Joshua's exploits. The book is not to be read as claiming that Joshua conquered the entire promised land, nor is it to be read as claiming that Joshua exterminated with the edge of the sword the entire population of the cities on the command of Yahweh to do so. Younger Jr. says, if scholars had realized the hyperbolic nature of the account in Joshua, they compared it with other ancient Near Eastern accounts of complete conquest, the image of the conquest as represented in Joshua would have emerged in a far clearer focus than it has. I think I got 2 more quotes. Zion Zevet says something very similar as well. Kenneth Kitchen says something similar. This is how military reports were done. So again, this is a lot of hyperbolic language there.
100%.
100%. So we need to keep that in mind when we're doing this. He also brought up 1 Samuel, and he says that can't be hyperbole when Saul is commanded.
15?
Yeah, when he commanded to kill the Amalekites. And if you read in the account, Samuel says to King Agag, right before he kills him, as you made mothers childless, so shall your mother be childless. Wait a minute. If Saul had wiped out all the Amalekites, why is the king of the Amalekites' mother still alive?
Yeah.
It's hagiographic hyperbole. It's not saying they literally wiped out every man, woman, and child. Otherwise, David would not be dealing with the Amalekites a few chapters later. So, again, take this stuff into account. There's a lot of context there that's just not being acknowledged.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in 1 Samuel 15 that tells us that this is also hyperbolic. I mean, to name one, like you have Saul's warning in 1 Samuel 15:6, urging the Canaanites to depart from the midst of the Amalekites, assuming relatively close proximity between the Canaanites and where Saul was attacking the Amalekites, and that presumes a very local battle. So, like the geography was hyperbolic. This wasn't like a mass war. This was a localized battle that happened, for instance. Right. And there's so many more that I could go to, but that's just one example.
All right. Well, we're 2/3 of the way through, so we're getting through this quite a good pace.
In these cities, because men are always bad. They were all probably evil, demon worshiping, Israelite killing men. That's not true either. But the women, the little boys, and worst, the little girls, if I can try to tug on your heartstrings here, tell me why this all-powerful, perfect God would ever need to have these little girls either killed or become sex slaves. Why are those the only 2 options? Unless...
Well, they're not. Again, there's a lot more context there that's not being acknowledged. Again, the Canaanites were as evil as God says they were, engaging in child sacrifice, temple prostitution. Maybe their civilizations did need to be destroyed to prevent this happening from numerous future generations. And of course, in Genesis, we see God allows for an entire grace period for the sin of the Amorites to come into what it becomes. So again, we're not saying those are the only 2 options.
This God simply doesn't care about foreigners. I mean, that's it. From the own prescriptive details, not descriptive, we see God's heart. And it is not the pretty one that is described.
Okay, Than, does God not care about the foreigners? Is there any verses in the Old Testament about caring about foreigners, you think?
I don't think so. Like, there shouldn't be, at least.
I mean, like, one thing I think I know about there's so many verses about like welcoming the foreigner and caring for the foreigner. Deuteronomy 10:19, you shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Leviticus 19, the alien who resides with you shall be as a citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Like there are so many places where it's very clear God is directly saying, take care of the foreigners. For him to say that is just blatantly against what the biblical commandments are.
You could go on for Joshua to talk about Ai's destruction or the southern campaigns, the northern king's defeat. There's so much horrendous murder, genocide, rape, all of these things that happened from Joshua as commanded or endorsed or condoned by God. But let's move on to our 6th example. Let's talk about David. Now, here's the funny thing. David does some terrible things.
Yep.
Of course, the affair with Bathsheba and then having Bathsheba's husband murdered to cover it up. And you know what was awesome is we did have God say this was wrong. You shouldn't have done this and punish David. Oh, wait, he didn't punish David. Don't get me started. You guys know what happened. He kills David's son and then has David's multiple wives, which he was okay with because when David confesses his sins to God, you know what he doesn't confess? I married multiple women. It's left out. God doesn't have a problem with it. But then
well, David may not have realized it was a problem, but I mean, again, Angelos Tosato's paper on Leviticus 18:18 fights against that interpretation. Anything you wanted to say?
No, it's just what you just said right there. It's like, okay, so David doesn't repent of his polygamy, so therefore God thinks it's okay.
You know, if you go to a traditional church, I mean, every week we do absolution. You say, merciful God, I confess that I have not loved you with my whole heart. I have not loved my neighbor as myself. The burden of my sin is intolerable. And you mentioned the fact that if I forget how we say, but we say at some point, I confess the sins that I know about and the sins I do not know about. So, you know, just confessing sin does not mean you've confessed all your sin.
Then he has all those wives raped in public, which is a good time for me to call time out and say, you know what? There's one other category we didn't talk about. You have bad things done by people in the Bible that is a description that is not okay by God. Then you have bad things done in the Bible where we don't see God condemn or condone it. And it's in this middle ground. But by context, we could usually see God's okay with it. Then we have these bad things done by men in the Bible where God...
Wait, where does it... Where? It's just unjustified assumption there. Like, where does God say he's okay with these? Again, God is being merciful and trying to work through sinful people to bring about a better plan. If he literally condemned all sin and punished all sin, there wouldn't have been an Israel. There wouldn't have been a human race at this point. Like, you can't make that assumption, especially when you can actually make cases like Leviticus 18:18 that God is against things like polygamy, but he tolerates it and puts up with it, just like he doesn't. He tolerates and puts up with us now, even though he's every right to enact punishment. I mean, like, you can't make that assumption. And if you're going to play with this ambiguity, all we have to do is provide defeaters. And once we provide defeaters, you employ the principle of charity. You can't make that argument.
Commands it. But there's a fourth category here. When God does the bad things in the Bible. This is why it's so funny to even talk about these men at all. We have actually more examples of God being the one doing the obvious bad thing, not by my standard, not by my atheist lack of a standard, by God's own moral standard that he breaks in doing it. Like killing this baby, or when he tells a lie, like in 1 Kings. I've done so many videos, guys.
Okay. Let me play that again just to make sure we understand it fully. I don't want to misrepresent him. I apologize if I misrepresent anything he said. Let me just go back a little bit here.
Not by my standard, not by my atheist lack of a standard, by God's own moral standard that he breaks in doing it, like killing this baby, or when he tells a lie, like in 1 Kings. I've done so many videos, guys. You know about all of this.
Okay. This is why I open with the presupposition section in this live stream. God's duties and obligations are going to be different than what he prescribes to humanity because of his ontology, his place in his plane of existence, his fact that he is good and not a sinner, these kinds of things. Guys, circumstances apply in these types of things. God's foreknowledge changes his duties and obligations. God being on a different plane of existence changes his duties and obligations. God lacking sin and dealing with sinners changes his duties and obligations and allows for God to end life whenever he sees fit. But luckily he doesn't, because of his mercy, end all of our lives, even though he'd be completely just in doing so. So I don't know. What do you want to say about that thing? I don't know what else to say other than what I've already repeated at this point.
Yeah. Anything I say at this point is just going to be repeating myself and being a broken record.
But that biggest category is one we're not even going to get into. We'll just leave it out here. God does way more worse things than the most wicked men of the Bible. And so a lot of David's story is either God doing the wicked things, or it's that second category of the middle ground. An example would be like Saul, who doesn't want David to enter into the family. So he sends him on the mission to kill and mutilate 100 Philistines and bring back 100 foreskins to prove it. And David, we could say, was blessed by God to be able to commit this, but it's not clear. It's not a prescription. He goes and he doubles that number, 200 mutilations and murders, to which he gets his first wife, Michal, as a prize. Well, Brandon, things were pretty weird and messed up back then. Yeah, for sure. But did God, this perfect God of, not being stuck in time, ever say, wait, we don't need to do all this. Saul, just make David your son-in-law. If you take the Bible seriously, there was a moment when David was walking home with a bag full of 200 foreskins that he and his men stood over the dead corpses of to fillet. And this is the man after God's own heart. This is the man that God would use almost more than any other man up until Jesus. And yeah, it's not condoned, but it's not condemned. And I think that's something that needs to be completely understood. I can only give so many examples when God says, go do this. So
again, Mindshift, I thought we were just going to do the places God prescribes bad behavior.
Yeah.
And here clearly listing another description and saying, well, God doesn't directly condemn it. Therefore, okay.
That's exactly what I was going to say is, therefore what?
Therefore what? Like, Bible's written in a high context society. Okay. God is not going to literally show up and just constantly keep violating free will like he's going to. Like, what is God supposed to do? Like, literally just make sure that no one ever does anything bad?
Or weird?
I don't understand what the argument needs to be. Like, what is the better way to this? Like, given God's foreknowledge and our lack of foreknowledge, you can't say that you somehow know better about what should happen, because God has all these future possibilities in mind, and he may very well see, oh, humanity's so sinful, but this is going to be the best possible route. Let's just go with it. If I keep interfering and stepping in, worse things could possibly result from this. So given things like the butterfly effect, you got to take God's foreknowledge into account, which is, again, already been granted here.
So much of what happens in the Bible is not condemned by God, and it's obviously horrific by these people that God is using to bring about his will. So we're going to move straight on to Elijah.
And again, we also know about this in the Christian tradition. The whole point, one of the main reasons for the Old Testament is to just narrate how horrible humanity is, to show why we need Jesus to save us. Like that's one of the points. Like, look at this person God raised up. Look at how he was a failure. Look at the next person God raised up. Look at how he was a failure. Gee, it's almost like we need an actual savior. Like this is very common in the Christian tradition to say that, yes, that's why the Old Testament is necessary, so we can see how horrible humanity was and why God eventually had to come himself and save us.
Elijah. So most people know the story from 1 Kings, where Elijah organizes this competition, to test God, to prove that God is real. And so you have all the prophets of Baal try to get their God to light up the altar, and Elijah makes his harder. They pour water on it. Elijah tests God, and of course, God shows up and delivers, and we see the correct God. Now, that's great. We have proof of who the right God is. People can make the right decisions, but that's not where the story ends. Then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away. They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. Now, I'm breaking my own rule. I am showing one of those middle.
Sir, your rule broke really early on. This is, I mean, you're basically just stepping on the broken rule again.
Grounds, because this isn't from God. But if you understand the context of this story and how much Elijah was blessed by God, essentially had access to God's checkbook to write whatever check he needed to write, and God just continuing to show up and do the things that Elijah was calling for, like sending down this fire, I think is an obvious example of God condoning the behavior. But I understand if this is the one you want to argue back with me about in the comments. But let's move on to Eli.
I mean, yeah, we could, but same things we've already listed at this point.
Yeah.
Sure. This one's going to be easy. How about the 42 children that were killed by she-bears for making fun of Elisha? And we can see this as a prescription if we just read 2 Kings 2:23 through 24. From there, Elisha went up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some boys came out of the town and jeered at him. Get out of here, Baldy, they said. Get out of here, Baldy. He turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. So a curse in whose name? The Lord. Now, if this was a curse God didn't want to happen, nothing would happen. But what happened? Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. I'm bald. In a billion years, I would never want 42 of even the most mature men alive mauled by 2 bears on my behalf of that. But Elisha, a great man of God, did, and God apparently also did, by blessing the curse. We're moving quickly now.
All right, let me put up some slides here, because I think there's a scholar I want to cite here, who I think is a pretty good point about this passage with Elijah and the 2 bears.
Yeah, I'm excited to see this, because I haven't really looked into this particular thing.
I got you, Than. I got you. I understand you need me. I got it. All right. So Peter J. Lightheart has a great passage. He says the phrase little boys in 2:23 can mean young men or subordinates. Bethel is the site of Jeroboam's golden calf shrine. In the context suggests that these are not children, but Levites of the idolatrous shrine. Elisha's curse is an act of warfare, Joshua-like attack on the sin of idolatry. He goes on to say, the young men mock Elisha because his hairy head is ball of hair. Is taken from him. Perhaps he is literally shaven his head in mourning over Elisha's departure. It is also possible that they are mocking Elisha because they assume he is unprotected without Elijah. Their taunt to Elisha to ascend also points back to Elijah. You know where you can go, Elisha. Elisha again demonstrates that he bears the spirit of Elijah, which is the spirit of Yahweh, for he can call, I think I was doing this by hand, so I probably should be bears there. And so I just had an autocorrect thing. From the forest as readily as Elijah can call fire from heaven to consume the soldiers of how do you, I forget how to pronounce that name. Ahaz. I forget how to pronounce that king's name. Ahaziah. Thank you. So yeah, let's talk about the phrase, because I'll push back and say, no, it doesn't mean little boys. Well, we have some examples. So we see in 1 Kings 2 that Solomon is called a man, but in 1 Kings 3, he calls himself a little child, uses the singular form of the plural form we see in 1 Kings 3. So this supports Lightheart's point that this phrase can be used to refer to young men, because Solomon at this point was a young man. He's in 1 Kings 3, he's already married to the daughter of the Pharaoh at this point. So this is not a little child at this point. In 2 Kings 5, the Syrians take a little girl from the land of Israel. She worked in the service of Nahum's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophets who is in Samaria. He can cure him from leprosy." Now listen, I've got an 8-year-old daughter. I highly doubt she would have this ability to do this kind of thing at her age. She probably wouldn't even know much about this kinds of things and what's going on with leprosy and prophets. The context suggests she's probably a little older, at least in her teens at this point. So at least someone who's beyond the age of awareness, beyond the age of knowing good and right and these kinds of things. So what is Lightheart's point here? Lightheart's point is that basically this is, again, an attack on Elisha from people that are at Bethel, the cultic shrine of competition. They're mocking him for no longer being with Elijah. And if you read the context of the actual passage, Elijah and Elisha passed through this area before they got to the place where he was taken up. Then Elisha comes back and he's alone. The other point I want to make about this is, let's just say the numbers are literal. They're not idealized. It actually is 42. We're not talking about grizzlies. Did I kick you out?
I have no clue what happened. It just put me backstage out of nowhere for some reason.
All right. Well, you're here. Okay. So the other point to make is, let's say the numbers are literal. It's 42. We're not talking about grizzlies. We're talking about more of like a bear in like the Middle East, which should have been more, I think, closer to like the black bear or something. If 2 bears come out of the woods and there's 42 people there, how did it get all of them? Was it the supercharged bear? The text doesn't say that. So if we're going on what the text says, the argument I've seen some people make in the past is this may have been them actually trying to fight the bears off, and of course doing a horrible job of it. Otherwise, the normal thing to do would be to scatter and run, what these young men are supposed to do. So again, there's a lot more context going on there. This is not the idea of like a bunch of 6 and 7-year-old boys hanging out on the side of the road, making fun of someone's bald head. This is more about cultic competition. They're mocking him for losing Elijah. They're attacking him in terms of like this whole cultic thing, because they're devotees of Yahweh and these are devotees of the shrine at Bethel. There's a lot more context going on here. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration if we're going to evaluate this passage here. Anything you want to add or talk about that, or do you want to just move on?
No, I'm good. I missed half of what you said because of the little tech hiccup there anyway.
All right. Well, you can go back and watch later.
I will.
Samson, how about killing the 30 Philistines to pay his bet, from Judges 14:19? Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. This wasn't a gift that God had given Samson one time that Samson's been abusing. Every time that we see Samson do this, the Spirit of the Lord has to first come upon him. Another example of this is when he kills 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, or when he pulls down the temple. Judges 16:23-31. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes."
All right, let's stop there. What is your opinion of Judges, Sam?
That's a very broad question. That's a very broad.
The way I have always understood Judges, especially in the commentaries, is this is not a book where God is endorsing all this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Judges is arranged topologically. You start with the good judges and you go to the bad judges. It slowly deteriorates. Samson is the last judge mentioned. The implication is he is a really bad judge.
Yeah.
Let me show a video I have here. I actually did a whole video on Samson. It's called The Lesson of Samson. Did about a year ago. And I compare him to Ravi Zacharias, talking about all of the horrible things he did. So here's the video if anyone wants to check it out. The point of the Samson story is not that God is endorsing Samson's behavior. The point of the Samson story is God is working through bad people to free his people from these oppressors. So Samson is bad. The Philistines are bad. God is still going to work through Samson, even though he's a horrible person, to free his people from oppression. You know, it's like sort of like throwing a Molotov cocktail at your enemies. You know, the Molotov cocktail is not a good thing, but you get the idea. It's that you guys have caused so much oppression and hardship, have a little bit of chaos back thrown against you.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, in the passage Mindshift even cited, he says, you know, look at what Samson says at the end of his life. Please, God, strengthen me just once more and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And commentators have noted Samson is still thinking about himself.
Yeah.
It's about him and his eyes, not for your glory, God, or to help to fulfill the will you have for me. The point of Judges is said at the very end. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did was right in their own eyes. No one's following God. God is not reigning as king. People are doing all sorts of horrible things. The point of Judges is to show how horrible Israel had become since Joshua died up until through Jephthah, Samuel, because his last example was Jephthah. And again, Jephthah, another bad guy. When I've had David Falk on my channel, we talked about Jephthah. Jephthah's making this vow, not endorsed by God, because he's an idiot. He's horrible with diplomacy. So he's got to make this really horrible vow. And the whole point of the story of Jephthah is to show how stupid he was, not that he was some great man of God.
Yeah. And again, where is the prescription?
Thank you for reminding me of that. Where is the prescription? So again, a lot of what Mindshift brought up, brought up some valid points, things that need to be addressed for sure. Elisha, for example, the plagues, that kind of stuff, valid points. However, if this is an internal critique, we've not taken the full Christian worldview into context. The stuff I mentioned at the beginning, we've not taken into account the difference between high and low context societies. We've not employed the principle of charity. I mean, Mindshift directly said that if God is not condemning something, that he can somehow use that to argue God is somehow for it, which is a bad argument in multiple ways. And then again, I'm not even going to, I don't think we need to play any more of the video, but with Jephthah and Samson, again, that's the point of Judges. These were evil men. This is how bad Israel has gotten. They have abandoned Yahweh. They abandoned what they were supposed to do. I did another video on you know that passage in Judges 1 about iron chariots that atheists love to use.
Yes.
God was not a feat of iron chariot. I did a short video debunking that nonsense, but one of the things I noted in that video was this is about the degradation of Israel in the very first 2 chapters. Like, they're already doing horrible things and bad things and things they're not commanded to do. That's what Judges is all about. It's all about how evil Israel was.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying there. This was part of my frustration with this video when I watched it. It was just kind of like, I want to pick my words a little carefully here, but it seems like the main thrust of his argument is just presuming some sort of Christian fundamentalism and reading of the text, and then running and targeting that as if that's the only way to read the text, or even the best way to read the text. And it's just like, that doesn't line up with the scholarship.
I would agree. A lot of the arguments he sort of put up there that fundamentalists do make are bad arguments, but there's a much better arguments out there. And what else? There was one other thing I want to get in that video. Let me maybe jump ahead to something, because he does say something else at the end that I do want to bring up. I'm going to skip past the Jephthah part and go to his final thoughts here, because there's something else I think that's important that needs to be brought up.
So what's the point of talking about these 10 men who, yes, we're not all morally superior, which is totally fine. It's to show that this straw man version of God used weak and bad people to do good and righteous things is incorrect and fallacious. It is a misdirection from what we...
What'd you say?
What's the straw man?
Exactly. There's no fallacy. There's no fallacious arguments here. Again, he's responding to a 1-minute short where I was responding to specific claims about why is the story of Lot in the Bible. Okay. I didn't straw man the argument. I responded directly to what she presented. That's not a straw man.
Yeah. There's no place where like you are representing the argument in a way that it wasn't originally meant to be. Anyway, sorry. That just...
direction from what we actually see happening in the Old Testament with these men. And if you're going to blow all this off to talk about, well, that was Old Testament, what's your point? When Jesus says, I and the Father are one, when Jesus says, I am here to uphold the law and the prophets, the prophets that did these kinds of things, the law that endorsed it, the Father who prescribed it, what point do you think you're trying to make? Trust me, I get it. It sucks to think of this God that you think loves you and has a personal plan for you and is your best friend and savior is just another man-made creation of their time and place. I've been there. I went through it. I was in denial too. I made all the same dumb excuses that now drive me absolutely insane. But what other conclusions are there to draw if we're honest? How many times is IP going to be able to repeat that line? Well, I'm sure he knows about all the verses I just listed and more. Tons more verses than this. Hundreds more of that second category, and even larger of God doing the bad deeds himself. And yet we just get the same sad strawman over and over and over. Enough.
Yeah, enough Mindshift with the same sad strawman. That's why I put that in the thumbnail. No, I'm not the one making the strawman, sir. You are, unfortunately, because again, I was responding to a specific claim, and it's like you just come out of the woodwork and go, yeah, what about this? Why are you not addressing these passages or this? Those weren't the ones brought up. If those were the ones that brought up, I would address them like we're doing here. That's not a straw man. Ironically, by calling what I did a straw man, you're the one making the straw man here. Because again, who was I addressing and what did she bring up? You can't accuse me of a straw man. You're projecting that actual fallacy that you're committing onto me.
Yeah, there's a lot of psychologizing here going on here too.
Yeah, I love when they do that. It's always the psychologizing.
Jeez. So when is it going to stop, IP?
Never. What are you? Never. It's the same thing again. Like again, I'm happy to address these passages. Why didn't I address those passages in that short video, Mindshift? Because they weren't brought up. I didn't commit a straw man. For you to accuse me of saying that I did commit a straw man, ironically, you're committing a straw man there. Because again, you said you're going to focus on descriptions. You're not going to focus on descriptions. You focus on a ton of them.
I'm really curious because at the end of the video, he even brings up the fact that, like, hey, there's this category where God explicitly does the bad thing and actually explicitly does prescribe the bad things. But this whole video, he doesn't go over any of them.
Right. Well, I mean, again, those can be addressed by, again, looking at God's ontology, his foreknowledge, these kinds of things. If you're going to attack the Christian worldview and do an internal critique, the argument I've always responded with is you never actually do an internal critique because you don't take the full Christian worldview into context here. Again, we have never argued God doesn't have a right to end a sinful life or a life in general whenever he wants. You got to take that into account. You got to take into account his foreknowledge, planes of existence, these kinds of things. These also apply as well. If, for example, since God is on a higher plane of existence, if God wants to end a life and bring him into the next life, he can do that. God is not annihilating a soul in that instance. He's bringing him over. And you and I both believe in the possibility of post-mortem salvation.
Yep.
So given that, if God actually ends a life in this world, it may be out of mercy because he knows he brings him over. He'll repent in the afterlife kind of thing. So, that kind of thing. And we can make a case from scripture for that as well, but don't have time to do that today. What are your final thoughts on the video before we get to super chats?
I think this was fun to review the video. I think we should
do more Mindshift videos. I had a lot of fun. We might do more.
We'll just do a Mindshift series.
I would, he did a video on arguing Christianity creates a slave morality. And if Mindshift, if you're watching, you don't want to go to toe with me on that one.
Ooh, no.
I got studies, and that video was devoid of them. I had a lot of problems with that one, but
yeah. No, I'm definitely down to do more Mindshift stuff. And I'm down to talk if you're listening Mindshift, I'm down to talk anytime. Eric, because I know Eric Manning and I did a response to you on some stuff. We were supposed to talk, but that fell through. But again, I'm happy to chat. And final thoughts. I think, again, pretty much everything I said in the beginning, some of the philosophical issues, some of the assumptions, like you brought up too. Sometimes he treats it like an internal critique, sometimes he doesn't. If it's an internal critique, you're going to have to adopt the whole entire corpus of metaphysical views that the Christian's going to hold to. And if you don't, it's not an internal critique anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, we're not deontologists. I know there are Christian deontologists. We're virtue ethicists. So I don't say that God literally needs to condemn every evil thing, tell us every good action. See my video, Christian Virtue Ethics, to understand what actually that is. You can also see my video, The Case for Virtue Ethics, where I just make a philosophical case, which I had some of my philosophy professors help me with that one. So, all right, let's get to some super chats here. All right, we already put Fat IP up, but I mean, man, that's a
I love that. I need that picture. So, Fat IP, if you're listening, give me that picture.
God, man, it looks. I said that fat IP is really Southern IP. If you think about it, it looks like he really enjoys biscuits and gravy. I don't know,
Texan IP.
bacon butter, delicious bacon. Man. IP, have you ever considered debating Hugh Ross on theistic evolution? He would probably be more respectful than Eric Hovind. Let me just say on the outset, Eric Hovind, after that debate we had, did call me and apologize and say, you know what, I didn't act the way I should have treated this more as a conversation. I was a little too confrontational. So good on him. Maybe him and I can even have a conversation in the future on something. But yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with Hugh Ross as well. If someone wants to set that up, I'd be happy to do it. Thank you for the super chat. Sharon, I think that's how you pronounce that. Can you do a video on the Shroud of Turin? Is there good evidence for or against it? I think it's legit because there's sufficient reason it's real. I have not studied it that much. I just keep going back and forth because I'll see, Christians saying, I've got evidence for it. And I'm like, all right, let me take a look. And then I'll see atheists going, it's nonsense. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's not. Like, I need to sit down and actually study it. And I just haven't had the time. What are your thoughts on that, Than?
I'm going to withhold the majority of my thoughts on this for now because it's going to take me a while if I go into all of them. Because I used to be very skeptical of it. And I used to tell Christians like, Dad, don't even bother. It's such a waste of time kind of a thing. And then I tried giving it some actual time, and my mind is becoming to be changed on that. And I think it's actually really strong evidence. But I'm waiting until I research a little bit more. I need to understand the science a little bit more.
Yeah. It's one of those topics. It's like, I don't have time to study it because it's like a whole research project in and of itself.
It's great. It's insane. You have to understand a lot of chemistry, and it's going to be a while till I make up my mind on it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Have you seen atheist YouTubers shared philosophy? No. Have you?
Nope.
Never heard of them. Sorry. Thank you, Michael. Looking forward to talking with you. Than, question. You realize that one generation ago in America, British white churches, people of color were not allowed. Did God change, or did society force Christians to? Is that question for you, Than, I think?
Yeah, I maybe both of us, but let's just say, like, I guess I don't understand what the question of did God change is coming from here.
Mm-hmm.
Christians just the society changed. I don't really know what that has to do with like what God thought was morally wrong or right or.
Yeah, let me put up a study here while we're at it. Let me pull this up here because I cited this one. I've not only read this study like 3 or 4 or 5 times, I've also communicated with some of the study authors. So this is a meta-analytical review on studies that have looked at religiosity and racism. A very important study. One of the things they note is that this is the important thing here. So fundamentalism is correlated with higher levels of racism. Extrinsic religiosity is, but intrinsic religiosity is actually not in the non-significant range because it's below 0.1. So anything below 0.1 in that range is non-significant, but it's also pointing in the opposite direction. Now, if you don't know, extrinsic religiosity, intrinsic divide is important. So if you're intrinsically religious, you're religious for internal reasons. You want to follow the core tenets of the religion. You want to follow Jesus, or you really do believe he rose from the dead. If you're extrinsically religious, you're religious for external reasons, like it's part of a social club, it's part of what your family tradition is. You don't really care about the beliefs necessarily. You could be an atheist technically and be extrinsically oriented. And so you can make the case that a lot of the racism is not coming from the internal aspects of religiosity, but the extrinsic aspects, when people get very tribal, when they start treating church like a social club and not like a hospital for the spiritual. They also point out in the conclusion here, we find no relationship between the endorsement of religious doctrines specific to the Christian faith and racial prejudice. So I don't think you can make the case that racial prejudice actually comes from Christianity. Humans are just naturally racist. And work done by Tom Holland, Robert Fogel, John Witt Jr. have actually pointed out that a lot of the values we get from Christianity have been pushing against these human tendencies to be tribal and racist and these kinds of things. And so, I don't think I don't really fully grasp the question. It's not that God changed. It's just that people started to get more intrinsically religious is what I would argue, and less extrinsically religious. Because when you are extrinsically religious, it does tend to lead to more racism. But again, Christians would be fully against extrinsic or the orientation. So. Divine real estate agent. What?
Promised land joke.
I get it. Yeah, I get it. It's free real estate. Off-topic apologist, but I'm curious your thoughts on Rebecca Barself saying the divine name in modern Hebrew sounds like was, will be, and now. I haven't heard that at all. What?
Yeah, I haven't either.
Yeah, I don't know who Rebecca Barself is. Sorry, can't help. Can you virtue ethicists? Can you virtue ethics your way out of a traffic ticket with police? Can you,
I bet you I could. Because like, I did one time. I was at work and I got a phone call that my friend was in the hospital. And so I was able to leave work early and I was doing 60 on a 25. And I got pulled over and I told the cop I'm rushing to the hospital because I need to be there for my friend. Instead of giving me a ticket, they escorted me to the hospital. So
I give them patches because my dad was a Pennsylvania state trooper. And so he gave me a bunch of Pennsylvania state trooper patches, and some police collect different patches. So, and I'm living in Arizona now. So it's like, oh, a Pennsylvania one? Like, did you get me out, officer? Like, you know, it actually hasn't worked the one time I tried it. So I ended up getting a ticket anyway. So. Yeah. So here's you get out of a traffic ticket. I have a foolproof plan. Drive slow. You're welcome.
Obey the speed limit.
Thanks so much for covering this guy. I've had genuine crisis of faith watching his videos and nearly left the faith. Thanks so much for guiding me back. Yeah, and a lot of the arguments he's made, like his video on slave morality. Just watch my video. Does Christianity cause Christian nationalism? You can watch Than and I review Prophet of Zod's video response to that, which was fun.
Yeah.
You can also watch my video, How Christianity Changed the World. Christianity does not create a slave morality. If you want, you know, just watch the video and you tell me if you think Christianity leads to a slave morality. Like, no, not at all, especially with those in light of those studies. So yeah, a lot of the stuff just check out both of our channels. You'll get a lot of good stuff on that. Yeah, but yeah, thanks for the super chat, and I'm glad we were able to help. Biblical hyperbole that explains God's power.
I don't know if that's supposed to be an attempt at a reductio.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, again, it doesn't necessarily follow. It's about context and how these are used, you know, that kind of thing. I don't think it is, especially in the New Testament where, you know, Revelation, God is called omnipotent. I mean, it's not going to follow there. I don't don't see that Mike Winger video in your feed. I knew you were a wingling. The Dizzle will have to roast. Which one? Oh, there it is. Yes. Yeah,
what videos in your feed?
Right down there. You see, wait, let me put it on the screen. Go back to I'll show you. Here it is. You can see it right down there. Look at him. They caught me. They caught me right there. I've actually not watched that one. So
I haven't watched a Winger video in a while. I don't watch YouTube videos. So
this is what always shows up in my feed is videos like this, because sometimes when I'm like writing or reading, I'll just listen to like,
you listen to synthwave?
Yeah, I'll listen to non-vocal music a lot. So I'll go back and forth between sometimes like it's like Irish or traditional music or synthwave. And then like I'll just play it for like 8 hours. And so then I get like, I'll check it and it's like someone made like a synthwave video and there's like a girl that's like half naked. And I'm like, how did this get on my screen? Like that kind of thing.
I love synthwave music. So that just makes me excited that you listen to that. That's all.
It just helps me focus is what I found. Like listening to some stuff like this. And so yeah, but yeah, some of the synthwave, so the thumbnails are just like, why do we have to have this as a thumbnail?
Yeah.
Fucking people, man. Everything's about sex now. Am I a wingling? I don't know. David can try to roast me. I will. Good luck with that. You lost me about
a boot.
You lost me about JK as America evil's top hat. The Lord did say, we must love our enemies. Even IP love Yak, and David would love Mike Winger. I must love Canada. Freaking Canadians. You're not actually Canadian though. I
Oh my god, I almost just made up a word. I'm I'm a
Oh, you
northerner.
hoser.
I
You
know. I was gonna
hoser.
say I'm a fortherner.
Freaking
I'm the
hell.
north.
You're in Wisconsin, right? Or Minnesota?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. That's a state that like. I have a question since you live up there. Are there more bars or grocery stores in your town?
Bars.
Yeah. I don't even understand.
I live in the boonies too, so there's one grocery store in my area, maybe within 20 minutes of me. There's one grocery store, and off the top of my head, there's at least 12 bars.
Freaking Wisconsin.
All within walking distance of my house.
I have no room to talk. I live in Tucson. We have more breweries here than we can count, and so they're just it's everywhere. And it's always the hipsters too. You know, the freaking IPAs everywhere. I hate it.
Oh my gosh.
I want to do soteriology study. Do you have any book recommendations that do a good overview about all the views? No. Maybe look at one of the series that does like 4 views or 5 views on something.
There's got to be a 4 views.
Probably. Look it up. There's got to be like some. Yeah, look it up. I'll go to the next super chat while you do that. How do we respond when skeptics say the book of Daniel is a late and fake prophecy? You know, actually, we had Rob Rowe on this channel when we responded to The Devil's Guide to the Bible. And he brought up some interesting stuff that Benjamin Noonan has been working on. And so that kind of stuff that actually makes the case that it could be earlier. So check out maybe some stuff Rowe has done. I've not had time to study a lot of it. I'm doing a class on Daniel right now at my local church, but I need to study it a lot more. I think there is some interesting stuff I have found that could support an earlier day. I know Jonathan McLatchie wrote an article arguing for some, and I don't think it's sufficient, but I think he does have some good stuff that could add to that. I think the arguments that Belshazzar and Darius the Mede are not real people is not strong. There's some actually pretty good replies to that kind of stuff, but you know, it's a whole nother topic. But maybe check out some of the stuff I mentioned there, like McLatchie or Rose stuff, until I get some. I got to get to some videos on it. I promise I'll get there. But you know, I might actually fall on the opinion that maybe it is early, but it was updated over the centuries. So it's like one of those things. It's like, yeah, it has a lot of early traditions, but it was, you know, the language was updated over time or something. I don't know yet.
Real quick on that soteriology thing. There is a 4 views book on salvation. I haven't read it though. So, but it's got Alistair McGrath, Clark Pennock, and John Hick in there. So all people that I think are good thinkers.
I got a question. Why does your camera suck? You keep coming in and out.
Dude, it normally doesn't do that. I don't know what's happening today. It's the hackers.
Opinions on Thomism.
I'm waiting for you to say it because I'm on the off chance I offend somebody.
I mean, I like a lot of stuff in Thomism. I wouldn't know if I would call myself a Thomist, but I mean, I go back and forth on it.
Fair enough. I'm not a Thomist.
Burn the heretic.
I fall a little bit more in line with thinkers like Ryan Mullins. So
yeah, I think Ryan has a lot of good stuff on that too. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I go back and forth on. I've not had a lot of time to study it because I'm doing my own videos, so that tends to eat up some of the time. Is an all just and all merciful God contradictory? No, not necessarily. It depends on how that God is. We could say that God is the cross is like, the analogy I've used is, if you got a coin, one side is justice, one side is mercy. The cross is where the coin lands on its edge, where God is perfectly merciful and just at the same time. So no, I mean, it depends on how God could be those things. So he is just, he does punish sin. Although I'm leaning more towards ransom theory as of late. But I mean, like, also it's, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. Well, that's really what the early church fathers taught. It wasn't, so, God Jesus isn't, being punished directly by the Father. It's Satan who's doing that.
You should listen to my most recent live stream. I think if you're starting to lead towards ransom theory, you might like some of this stuff.
No, I read in Philosopher Garb's book.
Yeah.
I just finished it. I thought it was a good case. I just don't know where I land on that all. So
fair enough.
I just don't know where to fall on it. But I thought he made a really interesting case if people want to check out his book. So check out Than's live stream with in Philosopher's Garb, and then you can check out his book. It's actually a pretty good case. I've been leaning
Kindle version
further
is
away.
great, too.
Yeah, I've been leaning further and further away from penal substitution, but I don't know if I'm ready to fully let go of it. I just, I don't know yet. I'm still weighing options on that. So thank you for the super chat, Dan Flynn. Do you watch geography videos? Do I? I'll tell you what I like to watch sometimes. I'll just pull this up. Hold on. This is sometimes I just like to watch like really like nerdy stuff like this, like the Middle East every year. I think it's like I was watching it recently. I love to go through these things because I'm like, wait a minute, what exactly was going on at this exact time?
Yeah.
For like a video or so. Okay, this is where Assyria was at this point. Okay, this is where Babylonia was. Okay. I go through these all the time. I love them. I've gone through the Iberian Peninsula one a lot. I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, I watch geography videos a lot. I love these guys. I love when people make these videos. I think they're amazing.
This is actually really cool. I didn't even think about watching any. I didn't even think about like looking up videos like this. This is cool.
Oh my God. I love them. And this creator is Oli Bai. He's got a lot of really good ones. And he updates them too. So like I've seen errors in some of them, and then he'll release a new one where he actually fixes it or makes it more detailed or cool. These are so useful when you're doing like biblical chronology. And you're trying to figure out, like, okay, Israel is at this point. What's going on with Assyria at this point? Like, you can go right to the exact year to see. And so he's got some good stuff. Oli Bai.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm just subbing to him.
Yeah, they're useful. And then you see there comes in the Persians and everything. And so, yeah. All right, let's get to the next one here. The new testing of the shroud done back in 2013 put the date of it at 50 AD, give or take 200 years. All the Roman coins on the eyes were minted 29 AD in that image. Yeah, I don't know. That looks interesting. I'd have to check that out. Than, maybe you should research that in the future.
It's part of my research. I have like a list of like 50 things I'm looking at on it, and it's going to be slow.
Yeah, guys, my goal eventually is to actually even hire Than as part of Inspiring Philosophy. And then him and I will write scripts together. And this will be like one of the things we do. So, if you guys donate more, bring Than on and we will powerhouse this channel. So,
oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's over when that happens.
No, but he's expensive. So,
got to get these nails done.
Yeah. No, I'm breaking even right now in terms of donations, but I want to expand more. We want to hire Matt full time so that he can come on and help me manage and do more stuff and grow and bring you on and bring a full time editor on. So we're barely just breaking even right now. So if anyone can donate, please click the link below, become a patron or donate, and that will really help us grow. The Jews worship Ezra. You see, this is the proof. And Mike Winger is a nerd. Some people's been watching too many David Wood streams. Yeah. I'm going to actually be on his channel, I think, Thursday. We're going to be talking about the Muslim cowboy again because
on David's?
Yeah, Muslim cowboy is becoming my new favorite da'i. He did you see what he did on Twitter that I quote tweeted or I replied to?
No, I did not.
Someone got on Twitter and replied to him and said, Muhammad is a sex addict. You would expect the Muslim cowboy to be like, no, he wasn't. But you're never going to believe what he said. He said, I am too. And that's a good thing. We're rewarded for having sex. Muhammad is a sex addict and I am too. Like, wow. Welcome to Dawa, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, dude.
Yeah, that was interesting. I had a fun exchange with him. So we're going to be talking. David wanted to talk a little bit about it in the stream. So we'll do that on his channel, I think, Thursday. If materialism is debunked, does it 100% mean God is? Oh, no. No, it doesn't. Because you could have a panpsychism. You could have some sort of like non-theistic idealism. However, I do think if you go into idealism, it's very hard to escape to get away from theism. I just think it becomes the simplest explanation.
Yeah, exactly.
And I even I had a conversation on the Gospel Truth with Joe Schmidt, I think like a year or so ago. And I asked him like this, and, you know, I forget exactly what he said, but he kind of like saying, yeah, I guess it would make theism more probable, something to that effect. But yeah, and also materialism, I would say, is debunked, but not physicalism, which is a much broader term. So there's a lot of philosophers that are physicalists that are not materialists. They don't think the everything is made of particles, but they think there's some underlying physical substance that it controls the universe or is the underlying universe. But yeah, I would. So you could still be a physicalist, but not a materialist. So keep that in mind. Thank you for the super chat, Michael, to help pay Than. He's a good guy. Awesome.
I appreciate the kind words, Michael.
Much appreciated. Yeah, that'd be the goal, is to get Than on board. Can you do a video on the veneration of Mary? Sorry, why are you apologizing? Maybe, but I mean, I don't want to. If I every time I do something on Mary, people start guessing I'm Catholic or I'm not Catholic, and so I would defend Catholics and I'd say there's nothing wrong with venerating Mary. Not totally convinced in all the Marian dogmas. I'm not, but they're not like, I'm not against them either. It's just I'm not convinced of some of them. But you know, I don't know. It would depend on what would be the point of the video. Because I'd be more interested in doing videos arguing for Christianity specifically and saying this is the most likely worldview, and that seems to be more of like a side quest, which I'm not even sure I really want to get into. I think it would take too many time and resources away from what I want to do. So probably not. Maybe down the road. I don't know. I you know, it's one of those things. It's like it's kind of like a side issue. Thank you for the incredible, generous super chat, 5 silver pesos. I always appreciate you putting in super chats. You always are incredibly generous with them. Did you hear AP said he was now an agnostic, no longer an atheist? I did. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I think that's great. He's moving in the right direction. So.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, he considers himself agnostic now. So atheism destroyed. It's destroyed. It's over. Pack it up, atheists. It's all over. The apostate prophet is now an agnostic. Can you send me a link to that channel? What channel? The Oli Buy? Just you're on YouTube now. Just go up, type in Oli Buy. Here, I'll show you again so you can just see the channel name. Oli Buy.
I'll send the link in the chat for you.
Yeah, it's right
guy.
He's a good guy. Yeah, it's a useful channel I have found. Again, sometimes I'd be like, I don't know if that's accurate, but I mean, like but I mean, that's like rare. Like 99% of the time, I think he does a pretty good job of getting like the years right and everything. So, yeah. All right, Than, I think we've gone through all the super chats. Anything you want to say before we close out? I know you're probably sick of being here.
I'm actually just hungry right now.
Yeah. Genuine opinion. Do you think atheism is a cope? No. I don't want to psychoanalyze people. I don't know. I'm agnostic on that. I'm not going to assume it is or not. I mean, I think I got to treat people charitable. I want people to be charitable with the Bible, which is one thing we pointed out a lot in this stream. We should therefore in turn be charitable with other people's opinions and why they believe things.
Yeah. I don't have anything else to add in. Other than Mindshift, if you're watching, I'm happy to have a conversation about anything really. Just reach out.
He will destroy you. Than will destroy you. Sorry, yes. I've been hanging around with too many Muslims. He'll destroy you. He'll finish, son.
Or you know, yeah, we could just do a fist fight too. Maybe we could just do a boxing match. Buff IP. Yeah, there's many of these guys around. I'm telling you, it's like the multiverse of IPs. Did Matt send you the picture I photoshopped of you? Man, I don't know if I want it. I'm concerned. What did you do? I don't know if you watch any, I don't know if you pay attention to bodybuilders, but there's a guy named C-Bum, Chris Bumstead. I just photoshopped your head on his body. Why? Why would you get a life, Than? Well, because we were we're talking about how we want to hire people for inspiring philosophy and everything, and I said, okay, rule number 1 that I'm initiating is everybody has to get jacked. I'm out then. You have to fire me. I'm not jacked. I try to work out and then I do it for 3 months and I'm like, I'm bored. I'm gonna take a month off, and then it becomes 6 months off, and that's my problem right there. Fair enough.
All right, everyone. I'm going to close the stream down. Next week, Wednesday, I'll be on my channel with sociologist Kenneth Vaughn, is a friend of mine. We're going to be looking at the Ben Shapiro, Alex O'Connor conversation / debate. A little bit about that, looking from a sociological perspective. So check that out. Other good things coming up. Thin and I are both working on videos right now on a study that's being published, doing a mathematical analysis on the Gospels. This should be pretty groundbreaking. I'm going to be doing kind of like a simple short video on it. Than's going to be doing a more in-depth video on it. So check out those. Anything else you want to talk about coming up on your channel?
On my channel, I got, well, that project where you and I are working on. I have my last installment of like Markan Christology stuff I'm doing. And then it's been way over a year and people have been waiting, but stage 2 contingency argument will be coming out in like 2 months. So
very nice. Well, I bet you'll do horrible at it. So
probably.
No, it should be good. All right, everyone. I'll catch you guys next week. I'll be back again live on my channel Wednesday, and we will see you next time.